Chapter 482. Do you have time to practice with me? Don't worry. Normally, I won't hurt you. Even if I accidentally hurt you, I can still afford the medical fees. Yep, if I accidentally hurt you, I'll pay for your living expenses for half a year. Diana looked at me with a smile that didn't seem like a smile. I was surprised at first, but looking at her dark red face and embarrassed expression, I roughly knew what the problem was. Experts were very sensitive to other people's gazes. Right now, wherever she was practicing with her sword, a bearded vagabond would constantly stare at her sensitive parts. That fiery gaze wasn't hidden at all. Her thighs, breasts, and buttocks weren't even left. He was basically a perverted criminal, so naturally she was in a bad mood. This was truly a misunderstanding. In the past, there were quite a few beautiful dark elves in Sulphur Mountain City, and he had gotten used to looking at beautiful women together with Adam. It was probably because he was chatting about important matters while looking at beautiful women. This time, he had gotten too used to it. Just because I was fine before didn't mean I was fine now. In the past, I was either wearing a semi-god mask that blocked off all senses or a skeleton, which obviously wouldn't attract the attention of the victim. But this time, I was less than 10 meters away, and my gaze was still on the important parts of the opposite party. Obviously, I was courting death. The thief Mark and the barbarian Mond gave me a thumbs up, meaning something along the lines of, amazing. Everyone knows that this girl isn't to be trifled with and secretly stared at her, but you didn't even try to hide it. You're a real man. Alright, I wasn't guessing. The barbarian actually shouted it out, but Diana glared at him, and he obediently lowered his head. Don't worry, it's just practice. I'll use the back of my blade. After thinking for a while, I looked at the displeased Diana slowly unsheathing her sword. She seemed to want to teach me a lesson no matter what I said. I felt a bit helpless and could only find an excuse. Actually, I just missed this sword technique. This is Sulphur Mountain City's third military sword technique. I learned it for a period of time in the past. You learned it quite well and have already broken away from the norm. But copying others too much will instead restrict your own path, which isn't necessarily a good thing. You really know how to brag. The old gambler knows sword techniques? I've never seen him use a sword. I did see him swing the wooden sword a few times, but it was like a stick. TSK, TSK, TSK. You must be spouting nonsense to pick up girls. Everyone looked at me in disbelief after I said that, but Tiana was stunned. She never expected to hear such words here. The person she respected the most had said the same thing to her before. Imitation is a necessary part of every swordsman, but everyone has their own path. Tiana, your talent in swordsmanship is actually above mine, but you're not me. My path doesn't suit you. I hope you can think more and walk your own path. Diana's face was filled with astonishment, but I simply stroked my chin and maintained a mysterious smile. Thinking back to the full beard on my face, I felt like I was trying to fool the blind with my coquettish eyes. Of course, I knew that she was using the third military sword technique. After all, Sulphur Mountain City's military training manual was written by us. Since Sulphur Mountain City's warriors needed to learn sword techniques, it was impossible for Adam and I, the two top sword saints of the continent, not to learn them. The knight's heavy sword and the one-handed sword seemed similar, but there was actually a huge difference. The third military sword technique was the knight heavy armor sword technique that I personally wrote. Since it was a common sword technique, I naturally wouldn't add in too many difficult techniques. Since it was a military sword technique, I naturally wouldn't be lenient. It was ruthless, accurate, and heavy. One strike for one life, and easily for serious injuries. Although it was a royal sword technique, it was like a mad bull when used, so it was also called the wild bull sword technique. And saying that Tiana was imitating others wasn't just empty words. It was originally a head-on third sword technique, and it wasn't very popular among the town security. After all, dark elves weren't known for their strength. But there was a stupid girl who trained hard in this sword technique, and in the end, she even surpassed her teacher, completing a new version of the wild bull sword technique. She added shoulder strikes, elbow strikes, kicks, and other small movements into the sword technique, evolving the wild bull sword technique from a fierce charge into the wild bull sword technique that used the entire body to fight. But this sword technique was only suitable for her, who was born with extremely high stats. If others were to learn this modified version of the wild bull sword technique, its power would decrease. But on the other hand, those small physical movements that didn't have much killing power were very suitable for street brawls and dealing with drunkards. And on the battlefield, it was also very suitable for her indomitable fighting style. Now that I think about it, this Tiana, even her makeup and hairstyle are imitating that silly girl. Even that silly girl has a loyal admirer. How complicated. Alright, now that I mentioned it, probably everyone knew that the silly girl was Diana. Thinking about how that stupid subordinate of theirs had suddenly become a legendary hero, everyone's feelings were a bit complicated. I rubbed my chin, inexplicably deep in thought. But the silly cat jumped onto my shoulder. Do you feel like you're outdated? No, since it's such a high imitation, the armor should be the same. I'm imagining what that silly girl would look like after wearing this armor. It should be very pleasing to the eye, but I keep feeling like something's missing. I suddenly have a new inspiration. How about I find a place and mail the new design to Adam? I suddenly feel like it's not wrong for her to want to get even with you. Also, can't you restrain yourself a bit? The silly cat's complaints came out of nowhere, and I could only helplessly smile wryly. I didn't want to either. Who knew that the 7 original sins would be like this after returning? It's probably a good thing that my soul is complete, but I didn't need to say anything else. Everyone knew what was going on. After the Hades was built, due to certain reasons, the emotions that the 7 original sins represented returned to my soul after the 7 infernos were completely rebuilt. It was just like how someone who had been restraining themselves for too long would likely be unable to control themselves if they were suddenly released. I was actually not used to having my soul complete. The lack of emotions from the 7 original sins had accompanied me for countless years. Now that they had all returned, it was indeed a bit unbearable. A life without desires would make one like a walking corpse, but when one had too many thoughts, it would be difficult to control. This sudden idea that popped out was probably just a small inconvenience. Of course, I was confident that I could control it well. Having my emotions and soul complete would also allow me to improve further. However, I was afraid that it would take some time to completely deal with my violent emotions. My previous words were obviously a mistake due to this. If this was in the past, since I didn't want to expose myself, I would have shamelessly talked nonsense with her, turning this duel into a farce. Pure rationality didn't require too much emotional interference. But now, pointing out the shortcomings of a sword saint from such a high position would naturally attract a great deal of attention from her. It would seem that I still had some useless pride. Shing. As expected, Diana still unsheathed her sword. But this time, her expression was serious. Someone who could point out the pros and cons of her swordsmanship after watching her practice for only a few dozen minutes was most likely much stronger than her. Please enlighten me. Sword saint. This time, after taking a deep breath, Diana held her sword with both hands and looked at her opponent at eye level. She came with the mentality of asking for guidance from an expert. Relaxing her hands, she raised her sword over her shoulder and swung it horizontally to the right. This was the starting stance of the Raging Bull swordsmanship's 3 killing moves. It seemed that as soon as she started, she would give it her all. At this point, the arrow was already knocked on the bowstring and had to be released. Even the others were watching. I shook my head but still got up. It seemed that I couldn't avoid it. Just play around. Don't be too serious. I'm very weak right now. Ouch, ouch, ouch. What are you doing, Catalina? I had just picked up a wooden stick and was planning to practice with the little girl when my ear started to hurt. Apologies, guest. Please don't bother with this bastard. This guy just likes to brag and be stubborn. He's always trying to scare people. Actually, he doesn't have any skills. He's already been taught a lesson by many adventurers. Her aqua blue hair was tied with a pink ribbon. Under her willow leaf-like eyebrows were phoenix eyes that were always full of energy. Her simple barmaid uniform had the golden embroidery of a noble maid's uniform. Her red apple-like face had a few imperfect pimples. When she spoke, she even danced with her hands and feet. Her entire person gave off the feeling that she was full of energy. But at this moment, this stupid girl number 2 was actually twisting my ear. Ouch, ouch, damn girl. What are you doing? I'm saving you. Idiot, hurry up and apologize to this great adventurer. Did you forget how you were thrown out by that dwarf craftsman last month? Ha, I was really able to fix that iron motorcycle back then. How could I have known that those bastard gnomes were such scammers? The moment I opened the lid, they self-destructed. Also, that great mage found that wand in the ruins. You actually said that you could identify it. What was the result? If you can't identify it, then you're just spouting nonsense. I didn't lie. That was a pink spell, summoning tentacle surgery. That mage was too embarrassed to admit the truth. Catalina, do you believe me or that mage? Of course it's the great mage. I've already been tricked by you enough. What legendary ice mage, the strongest sword saint in the continent. You've caused me to be laughed at so many times. I'd be really stupid to believe you again. But such words were unable to move the furious barkeeper's daughter. She suddenly pressed my head down and bowed to Diana in apology. I'm sorry, great adventurer. Although this bastard is full of nonsense, and although he's a lazy, drunkard, and gambler, he's still a good person. As an apology, I'll waive your accommodation fees for the next few days. But when she turned her head, she had an expression like that of a devil. The reduced income will all be put on your debt. Stinky drunkard, go wash the dishes for me. Don't even think about being lazy. Then, she bowed again, turned around, grabbed me by the collar, and directly dragged me away. Hey, I'm really good at fighting. I'm a sword saint. You can't treat an epic hero like this. I'm really a big shot, a really, really big shot. But unfortunately, no one believed the truth. It seemed that Catalina, who was born with divine strength, was worried that such nonsense would anger the great adventurer. She ran even faster. Haha, as expected of a classic scene. I won't get tired of watching it. Catalina, do your best. Let him wash the boss's stinky socks. Caro, if you're an epic hero, then I'm a demigod-level lich. My feet, which were dragged by a monstrous force, left a groove on the ground. But the empty ground was already filled with laughter. Did I really make a mistake? Shaking her head helplessly, Diana sheathed her sword. She kept feeling that something was wrong. Mudun, I really am a legendary hero. You brat Shurdan, you actually dare to laugh at me. Fine, when I recover my strength, I'll really turn you into a lich. Haha, I'll be waiting for you. I'm so scared, great sword Saint Caro. Ugh, no, your highness great lich. Then, the entire training ground roared with laughter again. It seemed that the air of happiness was everywhere. As for me, who was being dragged, I could only shake my head helplessly. Why was it that every time I told the truth, no one believed me? But when I tried to bluff people with half-truths, everyone fell for it. But feeling the increasingly frightening brute force behind me, I began to hesitate. In a way, this mixed-blood girl was a major factor in my staying in this tavern for more than half a year. This brute force has increased by 20% compared to last month. According to the system's standard calculations, my strength has already broken through 30. How terrifying! This can't continue. Perhaps I'll have to have a showdown with old Barton. Chapter 483. Nobody would have expected that a gambling addict and lazy drunkard who spouted nonsense would actually be that invaluable epic hero. After all, in the eyes of most people, the strong could be arrogant, sly, and untrustworthy, but they would never be so shameless as to not care about their reputation. When an ordinary man gets angry, blood splatters 5 steps away. When a feudal lord gets angry, blood flows. When the emperor gets angry, millions of corpses fall. Isn't that the point of being in this world? I'll take the life of anyone who dares to embarrass me. And it just so happened that there really was such a shameless epic hero in this world. Reputation? Can I eat it? Yep, it's definitely to hide my identity, and not just for fun. Alright then, I admit that sometimes it was quite amusing to tell the truth, but others didn't believe me no matter what. But in another aspect, I wasn't lying. I was indeed incredibly weak right now. Roland missed. Strength, 24, agility, 24, constitution, 25, intelligence, 32, will, 22, charm, 20. Bloodline, arbiter. Natural talent abilities. War angel form, original sin demon form, titan blood, gaze of the hell god. Basic job class. Level 60 Order Knight / Level 60 Chaos Witch King / Level 10 4 Elemental Swordcasters. Advanced job class. Level 6 Master of Winter. Overall level, impossible to evaluate. Magical pet, Harloise. Mount / armor, Irene Bela. These were my stats before the Battle of the Hades, but now Roland missed. Strength, 4, agility, 7, constitution, 5, intelligence, 32, will, 22, charm, 22, secret. Bloodline, hybrid of an arbiter and a wood spirit. This is what it means to be powerless. How could I have known that she would be so petty? She actually cast a weakening curse on me. I think that you deserve it. Agreed. By the way, if it was me, I would have been even more vicious. I was now regretting bringing the silly cat and Astria with me. Ever since Astria stopped using her disguise system, all sorts of ridiculous jokes and double insults made me feel helpless. However, the system that she provided was indeed quite convenient. After talking to her, she also gave me some detailed information on how to determine my stats in order to make it easier to cultivate. Attributes didn't increase in a linear fashion. Instead, they increased by analogy. The higher the attributes, the lower the number of existences that could achieve them. Strength, muscle strength and sturdiness 4 strength. The lower limit for a human is 3, which is equivalent to a vegetable, so if your strength is only 4, it is a compliment when people say that you are weak. Normally, a goose is 6, so you have the strength of half a goose. Agility includes your body's flexibility, hand and eye coordination, reflexes, body coordination, and other comprehensive attribute. It also includes your control over your body and reflexes 7 agility. Amelia is quite kind. She only occasionally falls on flat ground at this stage, so it's still quite cute. It's about a dozen times a day. If it was 2 points lower, you would really have to worry about inexplicably dying from choking on water or slipping down a cliff. Physique, physical health, resistance to disasters and diseases. 5 points in physique, Little Sister Peach. Little Sister Lindayu, how are you? Don't cry anymore. You might really cry yourself to death. Last time, you cried until you fainted, and it took me a lot of effort to save you. Note: since your basic attributes are only forcefully sealed by the weakness curse, your real attributes are still there. Your physique will still be above the healthy standard. You don't need to worry about getting drunk or overeating when you drink or eat, but the hangover the next day will definitely not make you feel good. Be obedient and stop drinking. Basic attributes were the foundation of the physical body. The other 3 attributes were related to the soul. Leaving aside the fact that I was still a spellcaster with my original 3 measurements, just the fact that I was so weak in close combat was already enough to determine me as a useless piece of trash. As for why it was like this, and why those two fellows said that I deserved it, I would have to start with the backup plan that I left behind back then. The gods of the Hades were a part of the natural laws of the Hades. It was impossible for their true bodies to leave. This was a requirement of the natural laws, and from a certain standpoint, it was also a method to keep them in check. This restriction was far stricter than the gods of Achi, but it was in order to prevent the gods from interfering too much in the mortal world. Since the Hades themselves represented justice, the four pillar gods, who were the rulers of the Hades, were even more unable to violate the most basic natural laws. They would never be able to leave the Hades. Otherwise, the so-called justice and fairness would become nothing more than a joke. Logically speaking, as the pillar of law, Womian's Roland should also forever remain in the Hades. This iron rule was actually the only backdoor I left behind. No, actually, it couldn't really be called a backdoor. It was just that my ability was far too special, and I just happened to be able to follow the requirements of the natural laws and reincarnate. Yep, the loophole that I took advantage of was Womian's Roland. I became the pillar of law in the form of Womian's and Roland's god descent. After the god's descent ended, Womian's would still be the pillar of law, forever the god of justice. Losing his sense of self actually made him even more fitting for justice. As for Roland, he was just an ordinary dead person in the Hades. The rest was quite easy to understand. In this life, I only lived for a few years, and I didn't violate many god laws. In fact, I didn't even commit many crimes that were worthy of punishment. In less than a year, I completed the punishment of hell, and naturally returned to the cycle of reincarnation. This wasn't the first time I had returned to the cycle of reincarnation. Under normal circumstances, an ordinary soul would have all their memories and sense of self destroyed, and they would have to start all over again. However, since I was able to maintain my sense of self in the cycle of reincarnation, I wouldn't want to have another parent or have a terrifyingly long childhood. Every time I returned to the cycle of reincarnation, I would have to crawl out of the river Styx, and then find a system with the power of creation to ask for a chance to start all over again. This time, if I had to start all over again, it would obviously be too much of a waste of time. And so, I thought of other existences with the power of creation. Perhaps they would have a solution. That's right, other creator gods. In this world, the goddess of creation wasn't the only creator god. Unlike thousands of years ago, due to some unpredictable changes, there were now two other existences with the power of creator god that I could choose from. Needless to say, one of them was the Hades. As one of the former rulers of the Hades, I was completely familiar with this path. Even the gods of the Hades would give me the green light. However, if I chose the Hades, I would be unable to leave the Hades since the ghosts and other species within the Hades were also unable to leave. Unless I joined the underworld envoy's Hell Dragon species, it would be impossible for me to leave the Hades. However, I didn't want to be reincarnated as a giant lizard at all. Dragons and humans were foundationally different, and I would need to spend an immeasurable amount of time familiarizing myself with my physical body. Since I couldn't choose the Hades, there was only one option left, which was even more straightforward: the wood spirits of the Forest of Dreams. Within the Forest of Dreams, the wood spirits were capable of directly converting adventurers into wood spirits without having to start all over again. This was one of the wood spirits' most popular services for a fee. They were also capable of directly converting the souls of the dead within the Forest of Dreams into new wood spirit. This was obviously a type of reincarnation that belonged only to the wood spirit. As I previously mentioned, Amelia had somehow managed to obtain the authority of the creator goddesses within the Forest of Dreams. The most obvious evidence was that the wood spirits had a completely independent soul reincarnation cycle, independent from all other worlds. This was obviously a special privilege that only belonged to the creator goddesses. Although this authority was obviously limited, as a natural species, the wood spirits were likely the strongest in terms of creating new physical bodies. This was also something that I lacked the most. And so, when the time came for my grand plan to be carried out, I personally went to the Forest of Dreams in the Bardi Empire and gave them a blood coffin. This is a sample of my flesh and blood. Is that enough? Relax, Father. We'll create a new physical body for you. When your soul is destroyed, you'll be able to revive through this new physical body. It's the same principle as a lich's phylactery. But how will you guarantee that your soul will return to your physical body? Will you need some sort of soul-summoning ritual? I naturally have a plan. Father, if you sacrifice so much flesh and blood at once, your body will become weak, and your combat strength will greatly decrease. What will you do about yourself? I naturally have a plan. Back then, in order to keep this a secret, I didn't even tell the truth about the wood spirits. I only told them that it was a backup physical body. Actually, just as I expected, I didn't need to personally go into battle. And after the Hades were successfully created, the world developed as I expected. The entire wood spirits spared no expense in investing in me, and the backup physical body that I created with my own flesh and blood did indeed retain most of my abilities. But man proposes, God disposes. In the end, I still fell short by just a little bit. And then you ran headfirst into her? How would I have known that Amelia would awaken so coincidentally? How would I have known that she would? Forced marriage. Actually, little Amelia is quite an excellent choice. In fact, from a female's point of view, you're the worst. Cursing you is already letting you off easy. That's right. First, you promise to marry a woman, get the dowry, and then immediately run away from the marriage. Isn't this the type of relationship fraud and marriage fraud that women hate the most? You're such a scumbag that Amelia only cursed you. That's quite cute. Cute? Are you sure that the woman who was entangled by countless snake vines and intended to devour me for revenge was cute? Are you sure that the demonic witch who caused the mega-earthquake that swept through 3 counties was only to prevent me from escaping was cute? Do you think that the crazy woman who formed a frightening face in the clouds and shouted, "Roland, you're dead meat," was cute? It's all your fault. You're wrong. I wanted to cry, but no tears came out. Did I mysteriously become the public enemy number 1 for all women? Weren't you the ones who tried to persuade me to run away? Weren't all of you the ones who said things like, "How can a marriage without feelings be happy?" And she must have slept herself into a daze. You need to think about the consequences. What do you think Eliza will do if she finds out? How did it become all my fault in the blink of an eye? Couldn't you be a little more reasonable? No. It's all your fault. Isn't there a saying on earth? A woman's privilege is to be unreasonable. All right then, it would seem that it was impossible to be reasonable with women in certain situations. But no matter what, I had suffered the consequences of my own actions. This physical body was Amelia's handiwork, so it was only natural that she had left her mark on it. It was far too easy for the creator goddess to fix her own creations. This curse of weakness that made it impossible for me to take care of myself was her ace in the hole to force me to obediently return. It should be mentioned that the silly cat, my soul-bound magical pet, was cruelly beaten back to her original form after showing off for a while. The inferno that she guarded could only be guarded by a special clone of hers. Although Harlow's abilities were rather unique, she was probably the only one who had a clone that was far stronger than the main body. But from a different standpoint, this curse of weakness wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Perhaps I'll become even stronger because of this. At the very least, I'll be stronger than that muscular idiot. I slowly sliced down with my knife, slicing off pieces of beef. It seemed simple, but if one looked closely, they would discover that each piece of beef was as thin as paper. Not only that, the thickness and shape of each piece of beef were identical. It would have been understandable if it was a good sword, But the kitchen knife I was currently using was a blunt knife that wouldn't even bleed when I cut someone. Eyesight, hand strength, and mental strength, my heavy body was a natural shackle for me. My lack of strength meant that I had to use all of my body's strength for every attack. My heart and body were in perfect harmony as I cultivated. Perhaps if I truly wanted to cultivate, I could cultivate anywhere in my life. I tossed a fruit into the air, and my knife flashed. What fell into my bowl was an exquisite jigsaw puzzle of fruit slices. When I scooped it up, there was even an extra rabbit sculpture. At the very least, my control over my power has improved significantly, and I've also gained new understandings. In that case, let me start over from the smallest detail and see if I can surpass that idiot. Now that the Hades had been successfully created, most of my responsibilities had been lifted. If I still had any worries, it would be my promise from back then to properly teach that idiot who had fallen into the abyss a lesson. Right now, we're far too far apart. Back then, we were about the same level of power. Now that more than 300 years had passed, it would be impossible for us to compare in terms of individual combat strength. If it wasn't for the fact that I cheated, he probably would have killed me with a single blow of his sword. Judging from how he was delighted to see Cynthia's true form and how he left, he would definitely become even stronger the next time we met. Theoretically speaking, our natural talents should be about the same level. In terms of effort, neither of us should have had any time to slack off. Yet, there was such an obvious difference between the two of us who were about the same speed. It wasn't difficult to come to a conclusion if one really looked into it. In the past 300 years, there were far too many things that distracted me. I spent a lot of effort thinking, planning, and strategizing. In the end, I obtained what I wanted. A mature team was gradually changing the world for the better, and the end of the world seemed to have been averted. As the Abyss Prince, Carwin's daily life consisted of killing, and eating. He also obtained what he wanted the most. He became the strongest existence in the world, and even killed his own enemy. It was difficult to say whose choice was correct, because everyone's choices in life were all the same. However, I was quite displeased that I easily lost to that idiot in a one-on-one duel. Now that I no longer had any pressure, I was quite interested to know if I would be able to fight against Carwin's in the end if I put all my effort into my own cultivation. Caro, is the roast beef and fruit salad not ready yet? Almost. I heard Catalina's urgent voice from outside the kitchen. Only now did I realize that I had accidentally sliced the beef too thinly and hadn't roasted it properly. The fruit puzzles and sculptures were also impossible to make into a salad. I would have to start all over again. It would seem that I should first deal with the important matters at hand before thinking about cultivation. Chapter 484. Please move aside, we need to investigate a case. Investigate a case? Who gave you such authority? This is the Sala Dukedom's Anton town, the territory of the God of Justice and Commandment. We don't welcome outsiders like you. At the first glimmer of dawn, I was woken up by a commotion at the entrance. Looking out the window, it was a dispute between adventurers. A group of people was blocking the entrance to prevent another group from coming out. It was a common case of people blocking the entrance. The ones who were blocking the way were quite familiar. They were the 3 newcomers from the cult investigation team. Considering that they weren't weak, those who could cause trouble for them naturally wouldn't be weaklings. They were obviously a group of clergymen, and they were members of the church who were doing quite well. Their white priest robes were embroidered with purple and gold lines. It was obvious that their rank wasn't low. Although the holy emblem of a cross and a silver holy sword was tacky, the faint holy power flowing on it was proof that they were priests of a true God. Behind them, there were more than 10 holy knight and warriors in silver armor and swords. It seemed that the Bishop of Naples had brought a knight of the temple to get back at them. The God of Justice and Commandment, Napuz, was a lesser divine power. His priesthood was not the justice that he proclaimed. After all, the concept of justice was too empty and vast. Even a main god would not be able to handle it. His true priesthood was only the derivative concepts of commandment, such as discipline, self-discipline, separation of classes, military rules, and so on. Many soldiers and lords were his believers. Is it another conflict of faith? Over the years, such things had happened many times. The believers of the various gods of order usually wouldn't fight with each other on the surface, but there were plenty of open and secret fights in private. As for getting along well with the various gods of Hades who fought for faith and influence, that was already an impossible task. The Sala dukedom was a small country. It wasn't even as rich as a county of a large country. It didn't have any powerful characters. Anton town was a remote town. Adding the 3 surrounding towns, the population didn't exceed 100,000. Napus was a weak god, so the number of priests and combat power were limited. The combination of all these factors meant that the church would only preach in densely populated areas. The small towns at the border of the Sala dukedom didn't have much influence from the Napus church. Looking at the boots and cloaks of the priest and the knight, who were covered in dust, it seemed that they had received a notice and were temporarily transferred from the bishop's district in the capital. Faith is the source of a true God's power. Believers are the true God's earthly walkers, and the parish is the true God's earthly palace. We can completely understand a true God's concern for his small territory. But obviously, this will not hinder our decision. Back in the day, the God of Law and the God of Holy Light had signed an alliance treaty in the Northlands that allowed the 2 major factions to maintain the most basic level of peace and trust. At the very least, before the Chaos Abyss's invasion and the Holy War ended, before both sides' common enemies were vanquished, this fragile alliance would always exist. Hadn't they already fallen out with each other? They had already made a move in the Hades, so why did their alliance still exist? It was precisely because they had fallen out with each other that the originally meaningless alliance became important. In reality, most of the diplomatic alliances between countries were like this. If both sides had the need to maintain peace on the surface and had common interests, then even an outdated agreement that was originally just a piece of scrap paper could find some relationship. A mere verbal alliance could become an ironclad agreement. And if both sides felt that there was no need for the alliance to exist, then even if they were allies recognized by the world, they would immediately fall out with each other in the next moment and fight to the death. And at this time, since Napus saw him as having been offended, he naturally sent out his loyal servants. But it wasn't to help his believers who were in danger, but to chase away the uninvited guest. And at the entrance of the Rhino Tavern, the Bishop of Napus repeatedly emphasized that the other party had crossed the line. They couldn't interfere with the matters here, as this was their territory. And faced with such questioning, Tiana and the others had long since gotten used to it. We allow the rules of the law and the scales of justice to guide us. We come for the fairness and justice in our hearts. We come for the ordinary people who ask us for help. You? For your great true God? Then why didn't I see any of you when the blood sacrifice first happened? The dark elves' mouths had always been very poisonous. Even if the law of night restricted lies and deliberately hurtful words, this statement of the pure truth was even more hurtful. The God of justice? Didn't you see what your God did for you? Seeing the other party's guilty conscience, Mary the mercenary pressed on. Mercenaries who didn't know how to bicker would probably die from anger sooner or later. Her questioning was also very difficult to answer. Only the rookie in the team, Saul, had a face full of panic. You evil blasphemers, how can you be fit to be the servants of God, you dark-skinned? This was what the bishop kept muttering. In his mind, the evil dark elves should have been burned to death, and the God of law, who was in cahoots with them, was also an evil god. No, it should be said that in the eyes of the fanatics, as long as they didn't worship their God, it was already a capital crime. In the eyes of the three members of the law faction, these newcomers were basically unreasonable, and the priests of the fanatics were the lackeys of the order true God. From the old bishop's point of view, the other party's contempt for the gods was an intolerable bully and a heinous crime. If it wasn't for the gods' strict orders to avoid conflict, they would have already started fighting. If it was anyone else, they would probably think that this was the inevitable prelude to a gods' war, a clash of belief. But for me, I saw a fundamental difference, a difference in the nature of belief and theology. The four pillars of light included the pillar of law and the pillar of holy light. They would also take on the role of a divine power server. The Southern sect and the Church of Law were both born because of me. The fundamental difference between them and the traditional gods' churches was that they didn't leave a place for the gods in their teachings. They believed in and recognized the holy light and the law themselves, not a specific god. Perhaps there didn't seem to be any difference, but there was a huge fundamental difference. This was related to the relationship between mortals and gods, as well as the future of the entire world. The priests of the various gods' churches would respect each other, because they were the most loyal servants of the gods, the representatives of the gods' will, and the shepherds of the gods' flocks. The identity of a shepherd was the root of their pride, and they had long since subconsciously drawn a line between themselves and mortals. However, the teachings of the two new major churches told the world that the world belonged to mortals, and that spreading belief was to guide people to do good and make the world a better place, not to serve the gods. The gods who stood high above were only officials with some special privileges, existences that could be replaced or even erased. If this wasn't blasphemy against the gods, then what was? Not to mention, the anti-knight, who was viewed by all the gods as their natural enemy, actually joined forces with the two major churches, which made the order gods even more displeased. From a certain standpoint, the Church of Law and the Southern sect used the name of religion, but they were actually digging up the graves of the gods. For some reason, I suddenly thought of the term generation gap as I watched from the sidelines. If I looked at it from a different angle, the era caused the old and new generations to have different values and views on life, which was far too similar to the different understandings of belief and religion that I was seeing now. The rise of a new power would naturally result in conflict with the old power. Not to mention the law job classes, the four elemental swordcasters, and other new generation job classes were rapidly spreading throughout the world. It was inevitable that there would be friction in terms of values, life pursuits, beliefs, and many other aspects. This scene was probably playing out in every corner of the world. But due to the existence of common interests and common enemies, under the pressure of the higher-ups, the grassroots had to maintain self-control. At the very least, they couldn't bear the sin of actively intensifying the conflict. And so, an extremely helpless scene appeared before me. The local bishop brought the knights of the Holy Temple from thousands of miles away to block their opponents, but they could only, "You're a bastard, your entire family is a bad guy. You're the one whose entire family is a bastard. My father is amazing. Bastard, do you dare to come out? Bastard, do you dare to come in? I'm coming in, if you want to hit me. Ha, if you have the guts, then make the first move." Since they couldn't fight, they could only use words. Clergy members didn't know how to scold people. Tossing away those impulsive religious words and allusions and turning it into plain language, what was left was probably the content of a primary school student quarrel. And since it was already confirmed that they couldn't fight from the very start, they didn't even have the ability to fight like primary school students. Since they couldn't gang up on him, some people thought of another method. I, Holy Knight White Behemoth, challenge you. With my lifetime of glory as a knight, let's have a fair duel. The middle-aged knight who was leading the group stepped forward. Judging from his epaulets and his aura, he should be a legend rank knight. It seemed that he saw that the strongest of the other party was a gold rank, so he intended to use his personal strength to suppress the other party. However, the others looked at him with worry in their eyes. Obviously, the situation wasn't optimistic. Due to the surge of the elemental tide after the Dawn era, it became much easier to advance than before. Gold rank masters became very common, and even legend rank masters became more and more common. In the past, the most difficult part of becoming a legend rank master was probably the step of condensing a soul imprint. That was a summary of the past, as well as a clear path for the future. It wasn't that easy to recognize oneself, and in the current environment, it was possible to advance successfully without a soul imprint. However, their strength couldn't be compared to a true legend rank master of the previous era. This kind of fake legend rank master wasn't even fundamentally different from a gold rank master. However, there was always a way. As they consolidated their realm, they could also condense a soul imprint. However, they were also destined to be unable to recognize themselves. This kind of soul imprint couldn't be compared to a true legend rank master. It was usually a common item that slightly increased a certain ability, but the quantitative change couldn't achieve a qualitative change. Such legend rank masters were also called pseudo-legend rank masters. Now, the Knight Captain White, who had taken the initiative to issue a challenge, was a pseudo-legend rank master who had just advanced not long ago. Perhaps he would be able to condense a common soul imprint after some time, but the current him wasn't fundamentally different from a gold rank master. It was no wonder that his companions were somewhat worried. If you lose, please withdraw from this mission and give us the latest clues you've obtained. We'll take care of the matters of the dukedom. When a dispute arose between the knight, who viewed honor as their life, using a duel to resolve the dispute was a very common choice, and this was also the best method that White could think of at the moment. We refuse. We have to carry out the mission. None of us. Saul had only spoken halfway when he was directly pulled back by a slender hand. Diana took a step forward, and with a flick of her wrist, the silver heavy sword brought forth a series of sword flowers. A knight is never afraid of a duel. Please. Looking at me from upstairs, I shook my head helplessly. How could this girl even learn something like this? Silly girl. Why would a dark elf learn the spirit of a knight? But as a challenger, and a challenger who bullies the weak, you actually think that you still have honor to speak of? Fine, as the price for accepting the challenge, if you lose, you'll have to leave behind the sword in your hand. Fine, I take back what I just said. Diana was much more cunning than Diana. The heavy sword in her hand was only a standard weapon, and its evaluation was excellent at best. The two-handed sword in the hands of the knight opposite her was glowing. It was obviously an extremely outstanding magical weapon, at least of excellent quality. It might even be of epic quality. It was definitely worth the gamble. And the most cunning thing about her was that she only said what would happen if the opponent lost. She didn't say that she would have to pay with her life if she lost. Even if she really lost, there was still room for negotiation. But the old-fashioned holy knight looked like this. Bullying the weak was beyond the limits of his shamelessness. Diana's not-so-harsh words had already made his face flush red. If this duel didn't concern the reputation of the church, and was of great importance, he would have had the urge to turn around and run. Now that he heard his opponent propose such a seemingly unfair wager, not only did he hurriedly nod in agreement, he even showed a grateful expression towards the female elf. He thought that she was taking care of his knight's honor. His panic-stricken teammates clearly saw something, but seeing that their captain had already agreed, they couldn't say anything else. They could only cheer for their captain. On the other side, the trio lived up to their reputation of being from Sulphur Mountain City. They were much simpler and more practical. Mary directly threw her small bag filled with all kinds of small tools to Diana. Those were the personal tools of a four-elemental swordcaster who relied on external items, and Saul handed Diana a pouch of ammunition that he kept close to his body. The various wooden handles of the grenades that were exposed from the pouch would make one's scalp go numb. Goblins didn't care what their main job was. If they decided that they had a part-time job, they would either be a merchant or a goblin engineer. And those bastards in the bar had already entered into the mode of watching a show. They couldn't stop pointing and gossiping. But at this moment I suddenly thought of something. I hurriedly got up and hurriedly went downstairs. Wait a minute. Don't fight yet. Show mercy. Then, when I suddenly rushed into the middle of the two opposing sides, everyone looked at me in astonishment. But they really did stop, as if waiting for me to say something. What clues did you find? Seeing the guide suddenly run down, the quick-witted Mary seemed to have guessed something. Her words immediately caused an uproar. But I did my best to calm my breathing. After a while, I raised my head and swept my gaze across every nervous face with a solemn expression. Using my thickest and most high-pitched voice, I said, "The gold-ranked female elf is 1-to-1. 5. The legend-ranked holy knight is 2-to-1. A draw is 1-to-3. There's no upper limit. You have to be quick." Chapter 485. Don't miss out on this. A legend holy knight versus a dark elf anti-knight. The odds are 1-1. 5 for the gold-rank female elf, 2-1 for the legend holy knight, 1-3 for a draw. This is a once-in-a-blue-moon opportunity. You have to place your bets quickly. I casually took out a blank account book from the counter and quickly made a betting list. Then I waved it around. Right, do you guys want to participate? I, Carlo, am a veteran. I guarantee that I won't cheat anyone. Duelist companions would usually bet on their teammate. However, when I tried to sell the betting list to the clergyman, I noticed that the scene had strangely quietened down. Aren't duels in bars very common? I was a little surprised. However, following everyone's gaze, I saw the furious holy knight. Some of them had furious looks on their faces, and some were even unsheathing their swords. I immediately came to a realization. All right, although duels in bars were common, epic and gold-rank duels weren't common in the countryside's Rhino Bar. It didn't matter if the newbies fought or the veterans joined in the fun, but a duel between high and mighty big shots was a little presumptuous. From a certain standpoint, these knight and clergymen were considered nobles. They were completely different from commoner mercenaries. That? Give you 450? Don't be angry. All right, I'm serious. I'm just joking. Looks like it would be difficult to do business here. I shook my head and shrugged my shoulders. Then, I ran back to the adventurers who were still eating their breakfast. But this time, my gambling coupons were selling like hotcake. 2 copies of the coupons were quickly sold out. Not surprisingly, most of the people were still optimistic about the epic holy knight. After all, the difference in power between the two was very obvious. Also, the holy knight's weapon was obviously not an ordinary weapon. When the difference in power was not that big, it would be an important chip that could decide the final result. With these two factors added together, it was natural that most people were optimistic about Head Commander White, who had come prepared. Looks like, if the Holy Knight wins, I'll go bankrupt this time. If I knew, I wouldn't have started the bet. At this moment, my face was filled with bitterness. It seemed that I was worried that I would lose too badly this time. Don't think about regretting it. You cheater, you went bankrupt long ago. Carlo, don't even think about reneging on your debt this time. We'll be watching you. Come, bet 100 gold on the Holy Knight. Ha, Carlo boy, I'll be waiting for you to cry. I'll bet on the female elf. Has Carlo ever lost a bet? Of course, there were also some very cunning people, but this did not affect the overall situation. For the sake of gold coins, most people still chose the stronger side, even if the profit they could get would be much smaller. His identity as a clergyman determined that this was not a scam prepared in advance. Soon, the total bet quickly exceeded 2,000. Hurry up and fight. Waiting for you guys to see what I'm doing. Dog fighting? If you're a wimp, go back and hug your mommy to drink milk. The boorish mercenaries didn't care about the big shots from the capital. When these mercenaries waved their betting slips and started to clamor, It was time for the familiar dogfight. If it was an ordinary myth rank expert, there wouldn't be any need for a duel under normal circumstances. They would first take care of these bastards and teach them a lesson about the dignity of a myth rank expert. However, the current Knight Captain White no longer had any room to retreat. He kept his eyes on his opponent without any hesitation or wavering. He represented the dignity of the Church. Challenging them in his own name was a decision he made from the very beginning. Even for him, taking the initiative to challenge a low-level knight was a form of humiliation in itself. Those who bet on us just treat it as around 2,500 gold coins. The others didn't react, but Goblin Thor tossed out a silver coin. It drew a silver arc in the sky above the bar and landed on my hand. I touched it, and it was actually the ancient Great Demon's voodoo mithril coin. Following the return of the Great Demons, many of these ancient currencies, which were both antiques and precious metals, appeared on the market and their prices weren't low. These voodoo mithril coins were even more special. Many mages collected them in order to research the possible witchcraft hidden in them. The market price kept rising, and recently, it was about the same amount as what Thor had reported. However, if it was thrown into the mage country, the price would probably double. As expected, the goblins won't miss any chance to make money. As I put away the mithril coin, I revealed a delighted expression on my face. However, I was cursing in my heart. Wasn't this guy intentionally trying to scam me? If his side won, wouldn't I be making a huge loss? However, I had no choice but to accept the bet. After all, on the surface, I favored that bearded middle-aged man. If I didn't happily accept the bet, wouldn't I directly reveal my true strength? Thus, I became even more hesitant. Don't misunderstand, it wasn't because I was worried about losing money. The reason why I won every time I gambled definitely wasn't because I had good gambling luck. On the contrary, my luck had never been good. The only reason why I could win every time was because I cheated every time. Although I could still cheat now, letting that idiotic Holy Knight win and letting someone else's church win would probably be even more unpleasant than losing money. Originally, I could have taunted those fellows from the Church of the God of Justice and Commandment so that they would place more bets to make up for my losses. But when I considered the fact that this god's concept was discipline, and that gambling was completely forbidden, I had a slight headache. Then let's postpone the duel and activate the backup plan. Harlois, let's move the plan forward. Can't you do something more serious? Didn't you say that the backup plan would be activated tomorrow? Isn't what we're doing serious right now? Who knows if there'll be new victims tomorrow? The safety of the innocent is the most important. It's our duty to eliminate evil cultists. Besides, with their investigative skills, how long do you think it'll take for them to find the truth? I'm so warm-hearted that even I'm moved by my actions. I can't be bothered to argue with you. Be careful that you don't screw up. While the two of us were still glaring at each other angrily, we didn't know that their duel was destined to end in failure. Soon, in the mountains behind the town, due to the carelessness of an outside adventurer, a sudden explosion would cause a small-scale landslide, and the secret of the mountains behind the town would be revealed. The burial ground of the demon dragon Winlair. That evil cultist from the Death Council had hidden himself quite well. In fact, I hadn't been able to find his hiding spot over the past few days. It was highly likely that he didn't even live in the nearby villages. Considering that they often had some undead characteristics, it was even possible that he had buried himself in a cemetery and waited for the adventurer to leave. No matter if it was their life signs or appearance, they would be no different from a corpse. If the adventurer was patient enough, it would be impossible to find him. But unlike those amateurs, experienced investigators wouldn't run around like headless flies, as that would only alert the enemy. They would only gather information and analyze the possible situation of the case. Among the many investigative methods, deducing the next target from the killer's characteristics was an old-fashioned method, but it was indeed quite practical. Since we already know that it's the Death Council, it's actually quite simple. The Death Council only has two goals in this world. The first is to open up a dimensional door to the undead planes and summon an undead calamity to spread death. The second is to create even stronger undead creatures to expand their master's undead army. The first goal could be directly eliminated. Even in this day and age where the elemental tide was constantly rising, the conditions required to open a dimensional door weren't just a few. Even if the entire town was used as a blood sacrifice, it still wouldn't be enough. Furthermore, this place wasn't a dimensional link with an unstable spatial structure, so it was impossible to open up a dimensional door to the undead planes. In that case, there was basically only the second possibility. And creating a powerful undead creature required a sufficiently powerful corpse to be used as a material, and this wasn't something that couldn't be found. The rest was simple. I opened up the town mayor's archives and flipped through all the historical documents, legends, and so on. I eliminated all the meaningless distractions and came up with the only possible answer. We only found the story of the Dragonslayer from over 300 years ago from a hero's hymn. The story was so old that there was nothing new about it. The general idea was that a few adventurers were commissioned by a certain lord and successfully killed the evil dragon that stole the lord's precious daughter. In the end, the adventurers chose to live in this area, and one of the spear-wielding heroes was the source of this town's name, Anton. The other two heroes also left their legacies in two other towns. After finding out the story of the Dragonslayer, Harloise, who was known as the Mobile Library, looked up the local history books and compared them to the names of the characters. She was able to find out which unlucky dragon had been killed here. Magic Dragon Winlair, that's the name of an elf. It said that he once lived with the elves for a period of time. Yep, as the elves' mortal enemy, the Green Dragon, he had a good relationship with the elves. He even had 2 elven wives. What's even more strange is that even though he's a wind poison dragon, he's an expert in fire magic. He even invented several unique fire magic spells. Countless facts proved that the truth of the legends was definitely a lie. Most of the epic heroes praised by the world were unreliable, but I still couldn't understand the difference between the actual records and the legends. An ancient dragon with 3 elements? He even invented specialized magic spells, which means he was at least a top-level archmage. Even a semi-god couldn't deal with such an opponent, yet 3 heroes who haven't even appeared in the history books of our country did? According to the records, there might not even be an epic-ranked one. We definitely didn't look down on this magic dragon just because of the records. First of all, he had been with the elves for 700 or 800 years, so he was definitely an ancient dragon. Secondly, apart from his natural wind and poison magic, he also practiced fire magic, which was his specialty in war and slaughter. He was definitely a frightening war machine. For now, let's not look into what happened in this small town. Since we knew that this powerful magic dragon had died here, the Death Council's goal was obvious. And so, as an extremely qualified undead mage, I had countless methods to find the remains of powerful creatures. In just an hour, I found the dragon bones buried in the mountains behind the small town. Boom. The violent explosion caused the ground to tremble, and the entire wooden structure of the bar was put to a great test. Very quickly, the dragon bones that had been blasted out from the explosion had attracted the attention of the Death Council's followers. Naturally, these fellows were unable to continue fighting. Originally, I had planned on waiting for another day to gather more information. But since there was such an unexpected event, I might as well do it earlier. Yep, I was just being hot-blooded, not because I couldn't bear to part with my gambling money. However, the entire ground was still shaking, and the wine glasses on the table were smashed to pieces. It seemed that I had gone overboard in some areas. The power of the explosion was too ridiculous. Heloise, how many explosives did you bury? That's a bit too much. I have 2 pieces of news, one good and one bad. Just tell me directly. After all, life is full of pitfalls. The good news is that our plan succeeded. I've already discovered the Death Council's followers. They sent people to keep an eye on this area, and they're currently hurriedly looking for companions to help. The bad news is that you weren't able to catch him? No, the bad news is that the Death Council went overboard. This dragon bone can't summon a bone dragon at all. Their plan was doomed to fail from the start. Isn't that good news? Of course it's bad news. The reason why it can't be summoned as a bone dragon is because it's not a dragon bone at all. What's buried under the mountain is a dragon lich that's gone mad from anger. And we just blew up his home. Chapter 486. Dragon Lich? Stop joking. Dragon liches aren't well liked among dragons. There aren't many of them at all. How could we possibly encounter such a rare antique? I'm not joking. This dragon lich seems to be furious. Hurry up and save him, at least before he kills all the lives around him. When the violent explosion blew up more than half of the back mountain, this sudden duel naturally came to an end. Along with the flying sand and pebbles of the mountain, a black pillar of magic rose rapidly like a beacon. It was a terrifying magic that was a mixture of death magic and dragon's might. Finally, it transformed into a pitch-black dragon of smoke in the sky. This was the symbol of an enraged dragon lich. Liches were not to be trifled with. They were a way for archmages to prolong their lives when they were at the end of the road. Although the weakest liches in name were at least legendary rank, and although transforming into undead creatures would weaken their physical bodies, the long years of experience had allowed them to accumulate mage knowledge far beyond that of ordinary archmages. Dracolics were even more difficult to deal with. Unlike the fragile body of a lich, there was an essential difference between dragon bones and human bones in terms of quality. The body of a Dracolic, which was formed by the combination of dragon bones and magic power, was even stronger than the high-level undead bone dragons. Dragons, who were born to be good at both magic and dance, had no reason not to continue to use magic power to strengthen their bodies after death. While making up for their flaws, the fact that they were willing to transform themselves into dragon liches instead of dragon tomb guardians, specter dragons, and other undead dragon species could only mean that they had already walked very far on the path of magic in order to preserve their spellcasting abilities as much as possible. If a lich was the benchmark of an archmage, then a dragon lich was the benchmark of an adult dragon and an archmage. It was rare and abnormally difficult to deal with. What terrifying evil! Holy light! That enemy is worth fighting! Blade of Justice, 3rd Squad of Holy Knight Squad, everyone is here. Gather. Charge towards the location of evil. The high-level Holy Knight who could summon a mount was preparing his lance. The other Holy Knights also naturally entered battle mode. The bishop tried to stop them, but was directly pushed away. Please don't stop us. It is our duty to defeat evil at the last moment of the Great Search. Sometimes, the Holy Knight class was not only difficult for opponents to deal with, but also complicated for their own people. For example, the Holy Knight before them was obviously a megaboss that they couldn't deal with. Most people would think that if they could defeat this boss, they would fight it. If they couldn't defeat this boss, they would be afraid. However, when facing an enemy that they couldn't defeat, the more evil and powerful the Holy Knight would be, the more excited they would be due to the Holy Knight's sense of honor. And if the Holy Knight had a town or people they wanted to protect, they would fight to the death without retreating. 7 years ago, after the battle between the Holy Light and the Guardians, Estrada's deeds spread throughout the entire world. The fact that the entire world was shrouded in darkness became more and more obvious, which made the Holy Knight even more excited whenever they encountered battles of sacrifice or protection. Although some people mocked the Holy Knight for being like berserkers who didn't know when to retreat, they had to admit that their bravery and sacrifice had indeed saved many innocent lives. This was also the main reason why the Holy Church's reputation kept worsening, and why the Holy Knight was always so well liked by everyone. Everyone would never forget those who truly treated them well. But right now, this fearless of powerful enemies trait of the Holy Church was giving their comrades quite a headache. With such frightening magic, they're unhesitatingly charging forward? Didn't the manual say that if you meet an enemy you can't defeat, the first thing to consider is self-preservation? That's not the main point. The main point is that they're so aggressive. They're probably going to attack the moment they see the enemy. Why aren't they communicating with each other first before yelling about killing and attacking? Could it be that anyone who uses dark or undead magic is definitely their mortal enemy? However, the Northland trio was quite calm. At the very least, the training they received didn't allow them to treat all undead and dark mages as natural mortal enemies. Apart from the humanized Northland factions, most organizations and countries wouldn't include self-preservation and calm communication in their training manuals. To them, cannon fodder and tools wouldn't be as useful if they learned how to think. But at this moment, the two investigation teams were on the same boat. If the Holy Knight really angered that powerful existence, the entire town would probably suffer a calamity. After some simple communication, the Northland trio followed suit. However, they first returned to their rooms to grab some backup tools. Before that, all of the mercenaries stationed at the Rhino Tavern also took out their weapons. At the very least, they were able to observe the situation at the scene, which was better than waiting here. Just as I was putting away all of the gambling scrolls and wagers, I was about to take a look as well, hoping that I would be able to collect the silly cat's corpse in time. However, before I could leave the room, I was pulled back by a hand from behind. "What are you going to do? It's not like you can help, so don't cause trouble for everyone." Although her tone was unyielding, there was some worry on her delicate face. Catalina held a broom as a strange dark yellow light flashed in her eyes. I paused for a moment, but the next moment I smiled and made a decision. "It's about time. Then, come with me. You can look after me so you can be at ease, right?" I reached out and grabbed the little girl's hand. The little girl struggled to break free, and her face instantly reddened. However, I didn't have the time to explain. "Old Barton, let's go out for a while." I hurriedly ran out of the tavern. Before I left, I even waved at the tavern owner. I jumped onto the horse beside the tavern, pulled the little girl up, and prepared to ride together with her. However, before I could take more than a few steps, the furious roar transformed into a solid dragon's roar. "It's you bunch of tin cans again. I was hiding underground, yet you were still able to find me. Fine, if you don't give me an explanation today and don't compensate me for my treasures, I'll wait for your god to come and take me away." The resentment in the dragon's voice rose to the heavens, and dark clouds suddenly gathered. The berserk anger could transform into a solid black whirlwind. Being able to transform one's will into something that could interfere with the world was also a sign of power. I once again revised my evaluation of this dragon Lich. It was likely that he was at least a top-level mage with a soul world. In that case, those dozen holy knights were basically given away for nothing. As for these holy knights, it seemed that they had taken the blame for someone, and many of them might have already died. Even I felt slightly guilty at this moment, but after thinking about it, I got over it. At any rate, they're here to investigate this matter. In the end, the Death Council will definitely involve the Dragon Lich. Compared to using the normal method of talking to the villagers, accepting small quests to increase reputation, and investigating one clue at a time, directly fighting the boss will greatly save time and resources. Fighting the final boss without leveling up and obtaining a holy sword? Are you sure you're helping them carry smurfs and not sending them to hell? Cough, aren't I going over to help? The Rhino Tavern wasn't too far from the mountain behind the town to begin with. Riding horses, we even surpassed the adventurers on foot, but when we arrived, we saw a frightening scene. A gigantic white bone dragon was roaring angrily, and in front of him was a golden-haired human girl. The knight Captain White, who had attempted to save the knight, was trampled under the dragon's feet, and it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. The Holy Knights' heads were all buried in the ground, and the third team of the Sword of Justice Knight Squadron had already been completely annihilated. Her slender golden hair was as smooth as silk, and her small face was as cute and alluring as a red apple. At such a young age, she already had the ability to attract people to commit crimes. "Let go of that, lowly, let me do it." The moment I shouted this, the scene instantly froze. The dragon Lich looked at me in astonishment, and then I realized that something was wrong. "I think I misspoke, cough. Let go of that, girl, come at me if you dare." The dragon Lich suddenly raised his head, and his vision swept back and forth between me and the golden-haired girl. Then, he raised his head and let out a shocking roar, and a black dragon's breath tore through the sky, the aura of death materializing. The next moment, the dragon's eyes, formed from green soulfire, appeared in front of me. Soul connection? Finally, someone recognized you. You're this brat's guardian. Not only did your brat play with firecrackers and blow up my house door, but all my treasures that I've accumulated for thousands of years are all gone, all gone. What do you think we should do? These are all precious replicas from the Elven Empire's era. Although they aren't the real deal, they're still the masterpieces of an elf master. Can you even afford to pay for them? The dragon's finger bone pointed at the ruins in front of me, where a pile of what used to be elven sculptures was abnormally eye-catching. It would seem that those precious artworks of the past had all been destroyed by the explosion. The next moment, the dragon Lich started rolling around on the ground and crying bitterly upon seeing the pile of rubble. "My treasures! My one-to-one replicas of the elven beauties! In the name of Aichi, how can this world be so cruel?" I paused in surprise for a moment as I looked at the dragon Lich, who seemed to be wailing and asking for compensation. For some reason, I recalled the tragedy of a brat in a certain world's otaku treasure trove, as well as the pitiful scene of those expensive figurines being torn apart. TSK, another Lich otaku. As expected, Lich that have been otaku for too long are all perverts? Looking at the current elf who had a face full of disgust as she said hurtful words through our soul connection, but on the surface she still pretended to be innocent. For some reason, I recalled the tragedy of Annie's surprise attack in Sulphur Mountain City. When my rare magazines and one-of-a-kind books ended up becoming that naughty brat's scribbles, Annie also looked at me with a face full of innocence. I pitied this unlucky dragon Lich even more. I suddenly recalled that in the information I'd read, this strange dragon had lived together with the elves for a very long time. Perhaps it wasn't because she coveted magic or secrets, but purely because she wanted to collect materials for her creations. Looking at Harlois, who was pretending to be innocent just like in back then, I recalled how I could only patiently reason with the brat after being robbed countless times by the brat without being able to lose my temper. I felt rather displeased, and the best way to vent my displeasure was to make others even more displeased. "Stop crying. You're a dragon Lich. Don't even mention the Elven Empire's ancient trash and crude replicas. I have the Elven Empire's elven princess here. Her inventory is definitely more abundant than yours. Right? You shouldn't be 2,000 years old yet, right? Then you definitely haven't seen the gold elves of the Elven Empire before. They're said to be the most beautiful and perfect elves. If you use them as a model, perhaps you'll be able to create a masterpiece." The dragon Lich stopped, but his soul fire began to burn fiercely. "Really? Gold elves? Impossible." No, truth-seeing didn't react. "You're telling the truth. There really are gold elves in this world." This dragon Lich had locked himself away more than 300 years ago. At that time, Harlois was still the Banshee Queen. It wasn't wrong at all to say that the gold elves were extinct. Right now, he was twisting his body in delight as black mist transformed into a pair of wings. His entire body seemed to be dancing a strange dance. "Wait a moment, you actually dared to sell me out. Dragon Lich." He was the one who told me to set up a magic array to blow up the mountain. Hurry up and eat him. TSK, a gold elven magical pet for rent. As long as you have enough rent, everything is negotiable. Chapter 487. According to the normal plot of a fantasy novel, this was how things should have developed. On the path of tracking down the evil cultists, the adventuring team that the main character was in a subtle relationship of competition and cooperation with opposing adventurers. They gradually collected clues and investigated the dark shadow hidden in the small town. Finally, with the help of the villagers, they discovered the mastermind behind the scenes. However, they didn't expect that the mastermind had already successfully released the sealed dragon Lich. The dragon Lich was undefeatable. The two opposing adventuring teams could only helplessly band together to resist. However, the enemy was far too powerful, and they were still no match for him. At this critical moment of despair, a certain person stood up. Then, there's the delightful method of using cheats to fight the boss. The most common methods of using cheats include the main character's aura exploding, summoning elite reinforcements, and so on. A more logical method would be for a priest to burn her life force and perform a god's descent. It'd be even more effective if it was a beautiful female priest. Perhaps the audience might even shed some tears. Right, if the female lead's popularity isn't high enough, she could sacrifice herself. Not only would she satisfy the audience's needs, but the second female lead would also take advantage of the situation and give the main character an excuse to explode in popularity. Although it's old-fashioned, it's indeed practical. Many of those legendary stories used this method. Although I've seen many of them, I still felt my blood boil. Especially when the female lead died, I really sympathized with her. I didn't expect there to be such a reason behind it. Truly, listening to a single conversation is better than reading 10 years of book. You're definitely an outstanding scholar. The dragon Lich Winlair kept nodding. He didn't even consider that if things really developed in a dramatic fashion, the main character would mysteriously kill off the boss in the story would be him. Of course, we were just spouting nonsense in our hearts. Stories were stories, and reality was reality. In this world, there was no such thing as the weak defeating the strong for no reason. Winning just because you put your life on the line was just a joke. A true victor would definitely have an advantage, even if it was just luck. You feel that he's improving like he's using cheats, that he's progressing step by step into glory. Perhaps you just haven't seen his advantages and his private hardships. People were used to ignoring the accumulation and repeated failures of successful people before they reached the peak. Those lucky ones who managed to succeed once due to a stroke of great luck, if they thought that they were the lucky ones and kept challenging those who were stronger than them, they wouldn't live long. In a sense, White and the others were quite lucky. At the very least, if it had been a normal Dracolic, its corpse would have turned cold by now. Perhaps today would teach them a lesson. Is it okay to leave those guys on the ground? It's fine, it's fine. I didn't expect the legendary level Holy Knight to be so weak. They all fainted from an excessive amount of negative energy. They probably didn't even see my face. But little girl, are you really a gold elf? Why does negative energy blast seem to have a buff effect on you? You are also an undead, but I can clearly feel that you are a living creature. Harloise didn't reply. It seemed that she was still unhappy that I had sold her out, but when faced with Winlair's question, I spoke first. That's a long story. It's a result of my personal research, and it involves semi-undead creatures. I trust that you, as a Dracolic, understand the rules. A mage's research results were his most important wealth. Forcefully stealing them would be the equivalent of starting a full-scale war. If he wanted to obtain information, he would at least need to give me an equivalent research result. Winlair nodded slightly and didn't ask any more questions. Even though he was famous for being easy to talk to among the extraordinary individuals, if both sides weren't on the same level, it would be impossible to talk to him on equal terms. Immemorial dragons were born with the ability to see through lies and illusions. Undead liches had abnormal soul vision. Winlair could tell that something was off from both sides. At the very least, he was unable to see through the little girl and the adult male in front of him. And the fact that even he couldn't see through them meant that they were definitely abnormally dangerous existences. The Holy Knight's personal warhorses were the fastest to escape. However, they were all instantly wiped out. After us, the other adventurers and the Northland's three-man team didn't travel very quickly. By the time they arrived, only the Holy Knight remained. However, these Holy Knights had died instantly. It was likely that they wouldn't even know what had happened. As for us, who had already left, I never expected that you would agree to enter my residence. After all, this is a dragon's nest. The hole in the mountain range had already been sealed up. Winlair walked in front with an oil lamp in hand, while the invited guests followed closely behind him. I apologize, I forgot that you don't have night vision. He suddenly snapped his fingers, causing all the magical oil lamps to light up. We were now in a hallway filled with murals. And we had reached the end of this hallway. Crack. All the lamp posts on the walls were lit up. We were in a gigantic hall with extravagant decorations and beautiful decorations. The only thing lacking was that many gargoyles were currently repairing the ceiling. It would seem that this was the place where the disaster had occurred. As for the collections around us, they were either this Dragon Lich's personal collection room or his bedroom. The sculptures, murals, paintings, and decorations were all filled with elven style. It would seem that this Dragon Lich was truly a pure elven fanatic. But the most ridiculous part was, "Oh my Winlair, are you Korean or Thai? Do you look like a female elf? Judging from your voice, you should be a male dragon, right? I was a male dragon when I was alive. As for after death, gender was meaningless to begin with. The pursuit of beauty was my only goal in life. I spent my entire life focusing on the beauty of elves, so it was only natural that I chose the most beautiful elf template as my human form." Winlair was about the same height as an ordinary elf, but he had sexy curves comparable to a succubus. His slender blonde hair was curled in a regal fashion. He was also one of the most outstanding elves in terms of pure beauty and domineering figure. His smile was so alluring. If it wasn't for the fact that his powerful soul voice couldn't be faked, I really would have thought that he was a miniature version of the Gold Elf Queen. My mom. He looks so much like my mom. His smiling expression is exactly the same as her mother from back in the day. Winlair's somewhat familiar face caused Harloise to recall her past memories. But right after that, she was openly displeased. But right now, the enemy was stronger than her, so it wasn't convenient for her to make trouble for him. "I'm tired." Harloise didn't even look at the elven artwork that she had been so interested in earlier. She transformed into her cat form and jumped onto my shoulder, closing her eyes and yawning. However, this scene startled Katerina, who had been trembling and tugging on my clothes the entire time, as she followed me. Catalina had once fed the silly cat food before, but the silly cat was completely uninterested in the leftovers from the bar. Now that so many inconceivable things were happening one after another, Catalina felt like it was too much for her to take in. Her Highness Harloise? I've heard of her beautiful name in the past as well. She's the most brilliant gold moon in the Gold Elf Empire. This incarnation of mine was based on a portrait of her from back in the day. Back in the day, my incarnation was only an adult version of my fake incarnation. Alright then, the original incarnation wasn't based on Harloise's mother, but rather Harloise herself. The silly cat's expression became rather complex when she heard this. Unfortunately, there's an obvious mistake. Gold elves are taller than superior elves, and superior elves are generally taller than ordinary elves. Your incarnation needs to be at least 1/3 larger. That's the size that a gold elf should have. Before I even finished speaking, Winlair, whose gender was unknown, took out his notebook and started recording. He then looked at me with a fervent gaze, as if he was waiting for me to continue. After a long while, Winlair finally calmed down, seeming to feel somewhat embarrassed as he coughed lightly. Cough, what a pity. It's truly regrettable that I wasn't able to live 10,000 years ago. If I had the honor of seeing Her Highness Harlow's true appearance, I would be willing to exchange my entire lifetime's worth of treasures for it. However, Winlair's gaze then turned towards the only mortal here. I wonder what this lady's relationship with you all is? The aura of death here is far too heavy. It's not suitable for ordinary people. I apologize for my lack of manners. Winlair suddenly stopped mid-sentence. How many years had it been since this place had been properly ventilated? The aura of death here was so thick that it could directly suffocate a living person to death. The fact that Catalina had followed me all the way until now meant that she was definitely no ordinary person. Dragon descendant? Demon descendant? Divine descendant? However, I denied all of Winlair's guesses. Actually, Catalina had hidden herself quite well. If it wasn't for the fact that I had read the walkthrough, I really wouldn't have been able to guess the truth. She's indeed not a pure human, but that's not important. I paused for a moment and looked towards Catalina. However, I discovered that although her face was filled with fear, she didn't have any expression of shock or disbelief. It was as if she had long since known that she wasn't human, but was afraid that others would know the truth. Caro, you? Got it. I lowered my head and smiled at her terrified expression. Then, I rubbed her hair twice. I told you before that I'm a myth-ranked hero. Why do some people refuse to believe me? Relax, I'm on your side. The next instant I spoke to Winlair. Actually, it doesn't matter who she is. What's important is her father, old Barton. He's quite the character. That's right, I had stayed in this bar for half a year not because of Catalina, but because of Catalina's adopted father, old Barton. Old Barton was a super fierce general who should have returned to the legend-ranked battlefield 10 years later. Old Barton was the myth-ranked strongest Dragon Knight general. If it wasn't for the fact that he advanced too late and died early from old age, he would have been one of the top 10 strongest individuals in this holy war. After more than half a year of training, old Barton's true power level had far surpassed that of his peers in history. His ores were becoming more and more similar to gemstones. I had high hopes for that ugly bald man's future. I also went to find Winlair to ask some questions, some answers that only he could give me. I originally found it strange that old Barton, a local mercenary who had nothing better to do, was recognized by the proud dragons and became a Dragon Knight general. Just where did he get his dragon bloodline? And it just so happened that he was a descendant of the rarest cyan dragons. But now it's clear. He, Barton Anton, the last descendant of the hero of the spear, is also your descendant? Winlair paused for a moment at my question, but then his face was filled with delight. She really gave birth to my child? She really does love me. My overactive imagination allowed me to instantly understand everything. At this moment, my worldview received a heavy blow. Barton was the descendant of the 3 heroes, so the she that this perverted dragon was talking about was naturally one of the 3 heroes. In that case, the so-called legend of the 3 heroes slaying the evil dragon was definitely far from reality. It's no longer strange for a demon king and a hero to fall in love with each other. It's also understandable that a dragon slayer warrior would give birth to a descendant of a dragon. Yep. It's completely understandable. It's nothing. I don't understand. My ancestor was a hero who defeated the evil dragon, not some. But before she could finish her sentence, Winlair hugged her. His dragon's strength instantly swung the girl up like a swing, but the next moment, she returned to his soft, rippling embrace. If your father is my descendant, then you're my descendant as well? How pitiful, you're so thin and weak. It must have been hard on you for so many years without any elders to take care of you. You can call me Grandpa, and I'll take good care of you in the future. But the next moment, he noticed that something was wrong with the girl in his arms. "You're not a dragon descendant? You're not even a living creature? A metal skeleton? What kind of life form is this?" I hesitated for a moment and looked at Catalina, who had a face full of fear. I knew that it was time to face reality. "Winlair, have you heard of the Halettim generation and their taboo research that touched upon the divine realm?" Chapter 488. When we returned to the Rhino Bar, Catalina still had a dazed expression. Her face was filled with panic, as if she had suffered some major psychological blow. She discovered that her father was hiding many things. She discovered that she wasn't human. She only panicked and didn't collapse. This proved that although she appeared weak on the outside, she was actually quite strong on the inside. However, the moment she entered the bar, her panicked heart caused her to instinctively look towards her father for help. Seeing Katerina like this, Old Man Barton, the bar owner, felt his heart ache with worry. He immediately glared at me. As for the others, they didn't care why a barmaid and a gambling addict had suddenly disappeared or what had happened to them. They all had their own things to do. In the middle of the bar's main hall, two plainly dressed traveling merchants were tied to chairs. Their personal belongings were all placed on a table to the side, and the most eye-catching item was a black silver skull pendant. That was the symbol of the Death Council. It seemed that we were overthinking things. This time, the Death Council's evil cultists weren't locals. They were free traveling merchants acting as a disguise. And judging from their unrecognizable appearances, they most likely didn't live in the town at all. They had set up camp outside the city. This was also an expected result. I had already patrolled the nearby towns and hadn't discovered any undead mages. However, the fact that they were living outside the city faintly hinted at another fact. These two weren't strong enough to survive alone in the wilderness. There were quite a few of them, and it was highly likely that they had their own camp. If that was the case, things would become complicated. This is troublesome. It seems that they aren't just random evil cultists, but rather members of the organized Death Council. They're probably just scouts. In that case, the Dragon Lich has most likely alerted them. They might take action at any moment. I was able to deduce all this in such a short period of time. This could only mean that I was far too experienced in dealing with trouble. I didn't believe that they would be able to guess it. Perhaps the enemy's reinforcements were already on the way. I was currently thinking about how to secretly warn these rookies so that they could quickly force out this information so that they could deal with it. I've already confessed. Don't kill me. There are 50 of us, and Priest Blackeye is the leader. He's a saint-rank undead mage. Alright then, this idiot was probably just an ordinary person not long ago. Even though stalling for time and waiting for reinforcements was clearly the best choice, he actually sold out his teammate. It would be difficult for anyone to save him. I glanced at everyone else who had expressions of realization. Is this a competition to see who is more stupid? Don't compare them to you. It's not fair at all. How many people in this world have more experience than you in causing trouble and being hunted down? I could only helplessly shake my head as I watched these youngsters hastily interrogating each other. I turned my attention to old Barton. At this moment, the black-clothed man behind me was so excited that he couldn't help but tremble. If I didn't stop him, I was afraid that there would be a good show to watch. By the way, why should I stop you? This guy forced me to wash the dishes yesterday. I'm his master who taught him martial arts. No matter what, I can be considered half a mentor. How could he treat his mentor like this? He's simply inhumane. Didn't you say you would wash the dishes to pay for the wine and the debt? As for his attitude towards his teacher, although I had a lot of things I wanted to say, I really didn't know where to start. The only thing I agree with is why we should stop him. Let's just watch the show. Yep, I don't think it's because I'm angry at that guy for feeding expired milk to his cat. The silly cat instantly self-destructed something. However, we exchanged glances, and then simultaneously pointed at the bald Barton. Look, that damned bald guy is Barton Anton. Barton also paused in surprise for a moment, but before he could react, a fragrant wind blew past him, and a soft, fleshy feeling against his body caused him to freeze in place. The next moment, the beautiful pair blossomed, and tears streamed down her cheeks like rain. Wah, my pitiful child. You're already so old. I've made you suffer. Dad. Mom's here. Stay with Mom from now on. Mom won't let anyone bully you. No matter how I looked at it, a blonde girl who was no older than 20 years old was hugging a burly, bald, middle-aged man and shouting, "My son, you've suffered." This scene was so beautiful that even though I expected it, I still almost spat it out. We were already prepared for this, and the others in the bar were even more ridiculous. Those who were drinking spat out water, and an unlucky dwarf accidentally tore off a piece of his wooden beer mug, chewed it to pieces, and swallowed it before he realized what had happened. Tui, old Entrick was scared to death. "Barton, brat, is that your mother? Your mother looks much younger than you do." "Yep, she's also much prettier." "Are you really her son?" "The almighty H.E., you're so different." "Idiot, can't you see that pointy ears belong to an elf?" "Right, how can an elf give birth to a pure-blooded human?" "It's inconceivable." "Just what species is his father?" "Ha, I don't know what species his father is, but he's definitely ugly, even uglier than old Entrick. Otherwise, how could such a beautiful mother have such an ugly son?" Pfft. All right then, as expected of the dwarves who were straightforward and outspoken. The dwarven shield-bearer and his companion's explanation caused a second wave of water spitting. For a moment, everyone's attention was completely focused on the criminal being interrogated. The fierce bar owner actually had such a beautiful mother? What gossip could possibly be more attention-grabbing than this? The most pitiful person right now was probably old Barton himself. At first, he was scared stiff, but now it wasn't that he was seduced by the beauty, but that he was unable to break free at all. That's right, as an outstanding warrior, he discovered that his arm felt like it was being wrapped around by a giant python. Even his bones were cracking, and his entire body was in pain. Forget about breaking free. If this continued any longer, he would probably suffocate to death. He no longer had the strength to speak. In his despair, he turned his attention to that unreliable master of his. When he saw that Barton nodded, indicating that he understood, he finally relaxed. "Barton is so happy. He told us not to disturb the mother and son reunion. All of you, stay away and give the mother and son enough space." Pfft. This time, what old Barton spat out was probably blood. He actually coughed up blood. Spitting out blood like this is a little ridiculous. Ah, hurry and save him. And so, with the old baldy spitting blood at the center, the entire bar descended into chaos. Cough, after the situation calmed down a little, which meant that I had finished watching the fun, I finally stopped the dragon Lich, who was overflowing with motherly love. This was to prevent him from using more and more force in his anxiety and actually crushing his only descendant to death. This time, he should have learned to respect his master. Ha, male students are so good. They're sturdy and durable, and they won't die no matter what. My previous education was such a failure. It was all because I was too soft-hearted towards girls. Yet, I don't know if your methods of education will succeed, but I do know that you're going to have bad luck soon. Take a look behind you. All right then, when I turned around, I saw a resentful Catalina glaring at me. Her fingers were still on my waist, about to exert force. Her resentful gaze made it seem as if I was some sort of bad person who had done something evil that would incur the wrath of the heavens. "You still dare to say that you're a good person?" I ignored the silly cat's words. It was just that the kind me was so easily misunderstood. More than half an hour later, after we wasted precious time dealing with the situation, "Barton, you're blaming me? Should you just watch me die?" We finally returned to the main topic. Since they hadn't found us for more than half an hour, it was likely that the Death Council wouldn't directly come looking for us. However, it would be impossible for our group to hide the fact that we had captured Barton. There would definitely be more trouble in the future, and the information we obtained from our spies made us regret bringing Barton back. Our previous guesses were correct. The Death Council only had two goals in the mortal plane. The first was to obtain powerful undead creatures, and the second was to open up a dimensional door to the undead plane, allowing even more undead calamities to descend upon the mortal plane. However, their main goal wasn't to find out that there was a powerful immemorial dragon's corpse here from an ancient ruin. To the Death Council, a small matter like picking up bones wouldn't even require a high-level priest to bring more than 50 believers. Their true goal was a historical ruin in the Halon mountain range, which wasn't far from this small town. It was said that the space around that place was incredibly unstable, making it a perfect dimensional door. The others didn't have much of a reaction when they heard this. However, old Barton, who had just recovered his complexion, had an ugly expression. I recalled that old Barton had mentioned to me that he had picked up Katerina from an ancient ruin. It can't be such a coincidence. But seeing how old Barton's expression was worsening and how he was constantly sneaking glances at Catalina, his unconcealable concern, it was probably the truth. In that case, it was quite obvious who the owner of the historical ruin was. A historical ruin from the Halettim generation? Many strange items from the Holy War were dug up from there. Perhaps there's some sort of strategic weapon. Even without a contract with the God of Wisdom, we can't let the Death Council obtain a historical ruin. As for the adventurers, even if they didn't know what an ancient ruin from the Halettim generation represented, they all knew what the consequences would be if a dimensional door to the undead plane opened right next to their own home. We definitely have to stop them. However, I focused my attention elsewhere. If it weren't for the fact that there were people watching us, I would have used a soul-searching technique to completely squeeze out all the secrets from these two Death Council believers' minds. It wasn't suitable for me to appear, which was why I had old Barton do it. The opening of a dimensional door requires a large number of sacrifices. Don't tell me that you've already prepared them? Everyone's expressions changed. The Holy War had been going on for so many years now, and the undead and demons' most desired soul sacrifices were now infamous. Could it be that these guys had been moving around Barton Town for more than just dragon bones? We brought many slaves with us. You captured them? Old Barton viciously glared at him. That chubby evil cultist met old Barton's gaze, but he didn't dare to look directly at old Barton. Just as he lowered his head, old Barton grabbed him by the collar and lifted him up. Old Barton's angry roar boomed like thunder in his ears. You've already attacked other villages? Captured captives to use as sacrifices? The chubby evil cultist was already out of breath. His feet were off the ground, and he couldn't stop himself from kicking around. However, he still hurriedly nodded in the end. We originally didn't want to come here, but Lord Blackeye said that he was worried that there wouldn't be enough sacrifices, so he wanted us. Seeing that everyone was looking at the other evil cultist, the thin man hurriedly nodded, confirming this information. This time, things were truly going to get interesting. However, I still needed more information. A one-way dimensional connection is meaningless. Which undead plane is the one on the other side? Which undead lord is responsible for this? Do you know? As expected, the two of them kept shaking their heads. However, the thin man suddenly seemed to recall something. I heard Lord Blackeye mention that as long as we complete this mission, Her Majesty Conservation's most powerful general, General Wu-Er, will grant us new eternal life. Her Majesty Conservation? Is there an undead emperor named Conservation? Why do I have a premonition that I'm going to be unlucky again? Chapter 489. From a certain standpoint, the Bardi Empire had the worst luck out of all the countries in this calamity. The Bardi Empire was indeed one of the few mega-empires in the continent. The powerful Dragon Knight Squadron was a powerful weapon of the country. The Empire had a vast territory and abundant resources. Mining, metallurgy, equipment, and other manufacturing industries were also world-leading. Plus, they had ancient inheritances and strong support from the people, as well as a large number of powerful generals and cannon fodder trained from long periods of war. The Bardi Empire's status as a mega-empire was quite solid, and its combat potential was limitless. But sometimes, an overly large empire would easily become a target. The Bardi Empire's rich territory made it a juicy piece of meat for new factions. The Bardi Empire's many internal factions and ambitious domain lords were hidden, unstable factors. In the game's history, the Bardi Empire had been the fastest to fall, to the point that outsiders couldn't understand. How could such a large empire be destroyed so quickly? But while a gigantic war elephant was a weapon of war, a fat pig was nothing more than a delicacy in the eyes of a predator. The dimensional door to the undead plains was opened in the Bardi Empire's territory. Countless spies had been planted both within and outside the Bardi Empire. Its citizens had been poisoned for a long period of time. Even the Emperor was under Asso's control. The Dragon Squadron's reinforcements also had other motives. The capital was still under the threat of the Titan giant. According to the game's history, the Bardi Empire's army should have been completely destroyed no matter what. It was the 16th year of the Holy War. Ever since the Holy War began, Emperor Orlos XIII of the Bardi Empire didn't show the decisiveness and initiative that he had since ascending to the throne. Instead, he constantly made extremely passive defensive decisions. Although he strengthened his military and prepared for war, he simply watched as the neighboring countries' battles fell into a stalemate. But in that year, the flames of war that no one could avoid still burned their heads. It was the undead who sought them out. On the third month that the pitch-black night mysteriously enveloped the Bardi Empire's capital, the undead arrived. In a single night, countless dimensional doors opened up in various countries. The largest dimensional door opened up in the Bardi Empire's capital. On the same day, undead Emperor Asso of the Desecration Plane descended and cast a forbidden spell, Undead Calamity. 90% of the population was transformed into undead, and the Bardi Empire was destroyed. This was what the game's history had recorded about the Bardi Empire. However, the current Bardi Empire had obviously changed beyond recognition. Sometimes, so-called fate wasn't unbreakable. A butterfly's wings were even more powerful than a god's prophecy. Coincidentally, the game's history gave the Bardi Empire a chance to overcome its fate of destruction. All of this happened because of a single person, the Bardi Empire. Everything. Amelia. 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 Due to some additional factors, Amelia, who should have been doing her own research in the Mage Country, just happened to appear at the undead's first descent point. And so, due to the influence of many factors that couldn't be replicated, the wood spirits were born. Due to some additional factors, Amelia, who was supposed to be doing her own research in the Mage Country, just happened to appear at the undead's first dimensional descent location. And so, due to many unexpected factors that couldn't be replicated, the wood spirits were born. From here on out, fate took a completely different path. Asso was a sly undead emperor who had spent hundreds of years plotting. He was the one who planned the undead invasion. He was the one who controlled the Bardi Empire's capital and Orlos. It could be said that he was the key person who controlled the Bardi Empire's lifeline and forced the Bardi Empire into a desperate situation according to the undead's plan. Although Asso's unexpected death caused the undead invasion to happen earlier than planned, it also startled the entire Bardi Empire awake. The Bardi Empire's internal war that was about to erupt paused for a moment, transforming into a battle for the survival of the living and the undead. From here on out, fate took a completely different path. After Asso's shackles were removed, Orlos, who had endured for his entire life, finally had a chance to take revenge. This old man, who had experienced many hardships in his life, exploded with the most dazzling brilliance right before his death. He unified the Bardi Empire, created new internal laws, required the domain lords to hand over their hostages, limited the size of the military, suppressed the domain lords, started wars against the outside world, and won every single one of them. In fact, he even expanded his territory to the highest point in history. Although all of this was already enough to leave his name in history, it was nothing compared to what he did in his final year. In the ancient Bardi Empire, pure holy light slowly rose like the morning sun in the center of the continent. From then on, those who steal the glory of holy light shall forever live in fear. The first pope of the Southern Church of Pure Holy Light, Amoya I. The Southern sect completely broke off all relations with the Holy Church. This seed that Roland had left behind gradually grew under the protection of Orlos and several other emperors. The first pope of the Southern Church of Pure Holy Light established the headquarters of the Southern Church in the ancient Bardi Empire. From then on, the entire world's holy light was split into two major factions, the Pure Holy Light faction and the Conservative faction. The God of Holy Light wasn't the only word for holy light anymore. The Holy Light faith, which occupied 70% of humanity's faith, obtained a new path. Holy Knights no longer needed to listen to the Holy Church's commands. There would be more and more independent Holy Knights who would only fight for their own faith. Far too many changes would become more and more obvious in the Holy War. This battle of faith would likely affect everyone. Orlos's second great achievement was to cut off all connections with Dragon World, completely breaking off relations with the dragons and Order God. That's right, this was something that would be recorded in the history books for a long time to come. In order to completely escape from the Titan's threat, the arrogant Orlos cut off the dimensional door connecting Dragon World to the mortal plane, causing the entire Dragon World to lose contact with the Titans for a long period of time. Countless lives were wiped out because of this. Yep, even though the Hades had been established and Orlos had taken all the blame, it would be difficult for him to clear his name before this holy war ended. Difficult to understand? Or, to put it another way, once the Order gods lost control of the entire mortal plane, the Hades gods would be on par with the Order gods in terms of influence, power, and so on. That would be the time for Orlos to clear his name. But now, everyone needed Orlos to take the blame, because nobody wanted to turn against the Order gods yet. That's because of Orlos's personal recklessness. He's already received divine punishment. The Bardi Empire hasn't betrayed the Order gods or the dragons. Even if everyone knows that they're lying to themselves, as long as both sides have mutual benefits, this alliance still exists. That's enough reason. While the dragons had suffered great losses, it wasn't their foundation that was damaged. The dragons of Dragon World would one day return. The ones that had truly been thoroughly offended were the Order gods. The newly established Hades gods were destined to challenge the Order gods' authority. The new Hades gods had been established in Bardi's Dragon World, so the relationship between the Order gods and the Order gods was still quite obvious. But for the Order faction, it would be an incredibly foolish decision to treat the entire Bardi Empire as an enemy in this cruel holy war. That's why, once Orlos takes all the blame and pays the price with his life, the Order gods can pretend that they didn't see the Bardi Empire's betrayal or the Hades gods' establishment. Although it's incredibly foolish, Orlos, who's nicknamed the Fox Scorpion, has already mentally prepared himself to bear 100 years of infamy for the sake of this fragile alliance. Of course, if Roland and the others had lost the battle against the Hades gods, the Bardi Empire would have lost its backer, and the southern sect would probably have been destroyed as well. And when news of the battle reached the Bardi Empire, it would be the Hades gods who had obtained the final victory. In that case, the Order gods wouldn't bother with their allies anymore. When a new heir appears, all those who benefit from the Order gods will want nothing more than to stomp him to death. But if he's truly strong enough to fight against the old Bardi Empire, Everyone will greet him with a smile, as if they were brothers from the very beginning. This was politics. It was dirty, unjust, and only cared about benefit. There was no honor to speak of at all. And the most pitiful part was that Roland and Orlas's schemes had grasped the hearts of the people. Everything developed as expected. Now, everyone in the Bardi Empire knew of Emperor Orlas's foolishness. However, this only served to accentuate how outstanding Emperor Orlas's successor was. After all, Emperor Halent had hastily ascended to the throne amidst the chaos and crisis that Emperor Orlas had brought upon himself. He used his political skills and swift and decisive actions to clean up the mess left behind by his predecessor. Inconceivably, Halent had reached an agreement with the dragons. There were quite a few tricks involved, and signed a new alliance with them. The Dragon's Knight Squadron was now 3 times as large as it had been at its peak, and as a neutral mediator, Halent had managed to get the Southern Sect and the Holy Church to sign a temporary truce. Halent also regained the title of Holy. He could be said to be a wise ruler. Unlike Emperor Orlas's militaristic development strategy, Halent had reached a truce with the Mage country not long after he ascended to the throne. But internally, Halent had voluntarily released hostages and reached an agreement with many domain lords, stabilizing his position. And this was only the beginning. After he ascended to the throne, Halent contacted the wood spirits and the Mage country, forcefully stopping the undead from invading Bardi's main battlefields. The undead calamity was unable to reach its peak, even though Bardi was currently facing 2 undead emperors and countless undead calamities. Dragon Knight Archduke Halent Milan, or perhaps I should call him Emperor Dragon Knight now. He was now viewed as one of the pillars of the human world, a hero that surrounded the entire human world. He was one of the brightest stars in this holy war, and the Prince Charming of countless young girls. But if I had to say, he just has a good father. It wasn't rare for an old emperor to control everyone's hatred and have his son, the new emperor, be a good person. Orlas's political inheritance would be enough for Halent to use for the rest of his life. Without the new weapons and armies that Orlas left behind, without the secret agreement that Orlas signed with the Northlands, Mage country, and wood spirits, and without the southern sect that Orlas left behind, would Halent be able to defend Nightrain Castle? Everyone always sees how amazing the new emperor is, but they always forget about the wealth that he accumulated through enduring humiliation. Without that wealth, would he have been able to fly? Old Orlas had long since known that his greatest enemy was the undead. He had created countless powerful weapons and research projects that specifically targeted the undead in his country. In fact, even the Southern Sect had started using the Bardi Empire's research on the undead. And when the Bardi Empire truly helped the entire human world fight against the undead calamity, all of his past preparations became extremely useful. I can't deny that the Bardi Empire has indeed stopped the undead calamity and the undead emperors over the past few years. With Nightrain Castle as the main example, the Bardi Empire has become a meat grinder for the undead and the living. But in terms of losses, the undead have suffered far more. Even though the Death Council had caused quite a ruckus by trying to open up a dimensional portal to the undead planes and other places, if they had succeeded on the main battlefield, would they have needed to open up a new battlefield? Gathering all the undead armies and pushing through the undead planes would have been the fastest and best way to obtain victory. And with such a large background, the dark cultists under the control of the undead lords were constantly active and searching for new exit. Although there would occasionally be news of undead armies flooding the main battlefield, this actually meant that the undead lords had lost their confidence in breaking through on the main battlefield and were forced to search for a breakthrough elsewhere. It wasn't so easy to create a dimensional portal that was large enough to allow the undead calamity to pass through. The Bardi Empire's dimensional portal had been created by the undead emperors for over 100 years, as well as Asso's soul sacrifice. It was quite difficult for the dark cultists who had just entered the Bardi Empire to move about. The undead army that they had obtained through the sacrifice was at most an undead lord's army. Although they had caused some losses, they were all quickly destroyed by the human countries. The undead hadn't achieved their foundational goal of breaking through the Bardi Empire's defenses. Indeed, there were a few countries that were attacked by the undead calamity. Everyone knew that the undead calamity would only get worse as time went on. Right now, every powerful country had a mobile army that specialized in dealing with the undead. The churches of the gods weren't doing nothing either. Even though there were a few small countries and cities that were suddenly turned into ruins by the undead, the encirclement and suppression armies arrived just in time and didn't cause any big wave. And this time, the Sala Dukedom was one country away from the Bardi Empire, which was over several tens of thousands of kilometers away. Even if the undead calamity arrived, it wouldn't have much of an impact. Fine then, the Sala Dukedom would probably be destroyed, but it wouldn't have much of an impact on the entire human world. This time, if it was only a few undead lords messing around, I wouldn't even bother to interfere. But since an undead emperor is involved, it can't be a small matter. I don't think that an undead emperor would waste time doing something so foolish. Either there's something we haven't discovered yet, or the ruins are incredibly abnormal. It's possible to create a second battlefield, but this place is too close to the Bardi Empire. In the end, it still depends on the size of the undead. If it's not just an undead army, but a true undead calamity, then it'll be of great strategic significance. That's possible. The increase in the elemental tide is causing the dimensional laws to become increasingly weak. The Halettum generation's artifacts are quite ridiculous. Nobody can guarantee what will happen. If the dimensional laws there are weak to a certain extent, it's possible that an undead emperor will directly descend even if there's only a few sacrificial offerings. And if an undead emperor really does descend, then that'll be a second battlefield. Two major battlefields will work together, which will be quite interesting. The silly cat, who was a magic expert, agreed with me. This helped me make up my mind. It would seem that we'll need another expert. If I recall correctly, Timlad should be in the Bardi Empire, not far from us. Yep, Timlad, the father of steel, the god's hand, and the creator of miracles. His nicknames are becoming more and more exaggerated. I hope that his strength increases to match his reputation. Chapter 490. What's the situation at the campsite? It's completely empty. Judging from the traces, they probably retreated as soon as the dragon Lich appeared. They didn't even bother to clean up their campsite. They were probably frightened by such a level of magic power. In that case, it would seem that they don't have that much power. They abandoned their pawns? I nodded thoughtfully as I recalled the two dark cultists who were locked in the basement with dejected expressions. Suddenly, there was a paw-paw sound outside the window. The window opened, and a snow-white eagle descended from the window, landing directly on Heloise's back, and then disappeared without a trace. It would seem that Harloise was becoming more and more proficient at using her clones for scouting and beast transformation. Although it was fine to wait for the town's security team to report back, there was a huge difference between a newbie and an experienced one when it came to collecting information. An excellent forest ranger would be able to determine a prey's job class, specialty, and body data from the weight of a broken tree branch. Experienced wood elves and druil would be able to use trees and plants as their eyes and ears. Archmages with the ability to see back in time would be able to directly look back at the scene. However, newbies would be able to lose their footprints, and newbie detectives would be of no help at all apart from messing up the scene and breaking all the clues. And so, when I guessed that they likely had companions, I had Harloise send out her clones for scouting purposes. There's about 46 to 50 of them, and they've brought more than 200 sacrifices. Most of them should be humans. Their numbers match the information from the two dark cultists. However, there are a few black-clothed people among them that give me a threatening feeling. They might be high-level undead creatures. If it wasn't for the fact that they intentionally hid it, even they wouldn't know. Is it possible to catch up to them? Impossible. They're incredibly experienced, and they've already entered deep into the mountains. It would seem that they also have a professional ranger job class. It's probably something like a dark ranger. I don't dare to get too close to them. If I go any closer, I'll lose control of my clones as well. Harlow's clones also had a limited area of effect. Not to mention, clones had negligible combat strength. In fact, they could even be killed by wild beasts or birds of prey on the way. They were indeed no match for professional scouts. However, they had some other wondrous uses. Here, help me send this letter quickly. We need laborers to help us. I passed the letter to Harlow's. She waved her hand and a white messenger pigeon appeared in her palm. Due to the natural limitations of the doppelganger, it was impossible to send it across the national border. However, it was possible to send it along the official road to the nearest post office in the largest town. Of course, they wouldn't consider using a normal delivery horse carriage. It would probably be spring by the time the letter arrived in Barty. This time, the mail company was a Ferries Air Express Delivery Company, or Ferries Express for short. Yep, that's right, air delivery. This was the ferry's newest service, and it was incredibly popular. In battle, information would be even more valuable than gold. As previously mentioned, the ferries would hire Air Knight to deliver news and important letters. And in order to serve the other species, the ferries had created the Ferries Express, an expensive yet highly effective messenger service. Of course, due to limited resources, a small town like Anton Town did not have a station, but there were definitely stations in the capitals and commercial cities of various countries. We don't have much time. They should arrive soon. You left the magic signature of Roland the Undying at the bottom of the envelope. Considering your reputation, I believe that those ferries will treat it as an important military intelligence. They'll send an air steed to deliver it. It should be back soon. But you really didn't reveal your identity to save money on the delivery? I cough. Let's discuss how we should split the money we just swindled from gambling. It would seem that the silly cat had seen through everything. I was rendered speechless. However, these fairies were truly greedy. Even if I used up all the money I swindled from gambling today, I wouldn't have much money left for alcohol. Are you trying to bribe me? Sure, I'll have the newest evening gown from the fashion capital, a purple rose outfit. I wouldn't be able to afford it even if I sold everything I own. I could only helplessly roll my eyes. Those so-called fashion outfits were ridiculously expensive. If I wanted to buy those, I might as well just obediently pay the postage. However, I suddenly chuckled as I looked at Harlow's, who kept gesturing with a fashion magazine. I even reached out and compared her height, which was only up to my waist. Haha. Even if I buy it for you, you probably won't be able to wear it with your infant body. How about I find some children's clothing for you? Upon hearing this, the silly cat's expression suddenly changed. She seemed rather frightening as she gritted her teeth. It's all your fault. I'm truly unlucky to have you as my magical pet. If you were just a bit stronger, I wouldn't have been restricted to being younger than 10 years old. Children's clothing is fine. I want the golden 06 pink wings for children. It's the classic pink lace princess dress from Black Forest Fashion Monthly. The one with diamonds? You want to mail order again? We're already out of money. Damned fairies. As expected, all merchants in the world are just as greedy. Do these cheap magazines all rely on advertisements to earn back their money? Just a little bit of cloth and a few buttons can be sold for several tens of thousands of gold coins. That's 100 times profit. That's even faster than robbery. Actually, ever since the fairies started their mail order service, the complaints I just said had already been made by countless men. The beautiful posters and fashionable dresses on those magazines were the best examples of the world's female charms. While all the women in the world were mesmerized by them, they also drained the men's pockets dry. Of course, it was impossible to satisfy the silly cat's request. The reason was obvious: I couldn't afford it at all. But at this moment, I once again witnessed how low Harlow's morals were, as well as how crazy women could be for the sake of so-called fashion. Harlow's, can you have some morals? It's one thing to write Demon Professor Harlow's next to my signature, but you even wrote in your letter that you'll hijack a courier if you don't give me 10 sets of the latest fashionable dresses? You're really going to rob me? A terrorist hijack a passenger plane? Can you be any more shameless? A vicious individual on the calamity rankings is threatening to rob me just for some clothes? I've lost all my face. However, it was obvious that the silly cat wasn't moved at all. Her mouth twitched as she glanced at me in disdain. She said something that would hurt a man's pride the most. It's all because you're poor. Wait a moment, that's not right. I'm not your man. I have no obligation to buy clothes for you. A cat only needs to be fed. TSK, poor bastard. Is it enough just to be fed? You barbarian who doesn't understand fashion. You said something that you shouldn't have said. While we were arguing, the bald old man was having his worldview cleansed. He only knew how to stare at the ceiling listlessly. Child, do you understand now? Old Barton nodded with a pained expression. Then, Winlair giggled as old Barton buried himself back into Winlair's large, warm chest. This time, even though Winlair paid more attention to his strength, old Barton struggled even more violently, and his expression became even more conflicted. After all, the only thing more damaging to one's worldview than having a beautiful grandmother from more than 300 years ago was the fact that old Barton was actually your grandfather. Meanwhile, on the other side of the battlefield, the team that was about to head out to search for the Death Council had finished gathering and was about to depart. Chapter 491. From a certain standpoint, the decision of that high-ranking priest of the Death Council to abandon his pawns was a wise one. After all, when news of their attempt to open the Death Plane's dimensional door was leaked, any organization of the living would immediately become their mortal enemy and would never allow them to succeed. The Northern Trio immediately reported this to their superiors. Requesting reinforcements for the sake of their reputation was a requirement in the first place. However, considering the distance and location of the Death Plane's dimensional door being too remote, it was impossible to determine the quality and number of reinforcements. If they were lucky, it would be great if they met a powerful individual who was strolling nearby. Since the northern factions had sent out quite a few independent parties, this possibility wasn't low. If they were unlucky, reinforcements wouldn't be able to make it in time. Meanwhile, the Church of the God of Discipline and Justice was much more flustered. Once the Death Plane's dimensional door was opened within their borders, they would be the first to bear the brunt of the attack. In fact, their entire dukedom and church might even be destroyed. The moment they received the news, they immediately sent someone back to the capital to report the news. Meanwhile, the other holy knight and priests were all ready to head out and hunt down those undead worshippers. Winlair still knew how to control his strength. Those holy knight didn't suffer any fatal injuries. What was truly injured was that their pride had been instantly destroyed before they even saw the enemy. However, there were more important matters at hand, and there was no time for them to lament their own weakness. The Knight White was still leading the group. They had already set out, but considering the clergy's usual inability to track, the others had high hopes that they would be able to catch up to their target. They could only hope that they didn't get lost too far, or that they were smart enough to bring a few rangers, thieves, and other mercenaries to lead the way. Meanwhile, investigating the Death Council was the Northern Trio's mission from the very beginning. Even if they didn't receive any reinforcements, they would definitely go. However, due to the fundamental differences in their beliefs and methods of doing things, it was unlikely that they would follow the Holy Knight. That would be nothing more than making trouble for themselves. From a certain standpoint, this became an unspoken competitive relationship. It was a competition to see who could deal with this problem first. I wanted to interfere in this matter, but I didn't want to expose myself. That was why the only ones who could truly count on us were us and the Northlands trio. It would be even more of a waste to split up our combat strength, which was why I tried to convince them to take us, the Smurfs. Actually, I'm a pretty good necromancer. If you bring us along, as long as the distance isn't too far, we can sense each other's death magic, which will make it easier for you to track them. Saying so, the black magic of death circled around his finger, proving his identity as a necromancer. If it were other forces, they would definitely be suspicious and prejudiced against necromancers, especially when they were investigating matters related to the undead plane. They would be even more suspicious of the other party's motives. But while they were shocked, their first reaction was, "A registered necromancer? Do you have a license? Have you finished your annual review?" Yes, he passed the annual examination last year. He's registered in Definder's headquarters. He's a legend rank necromancer. In some people's eyes, the Northlands was already a paradise for necromancers. The root of this was because the Northlands had normalized necromancers, turning them into an abnormally ordinary job class. 1 year before the Dawn Era, the undead Industrial Revolution began in the Northlands. This revolution liberated the productivity of the living, and also gave necromancers a chance to walk into the light. In the second year, ghost carriages and zombie servants took up 1/3 of the market share. After so many years of development, undead equipment, furniture, tools, and servants had become quite common in the Northlands. And in order to ensure the safety of undead equipment, things like registered necromancers' examinations and character checks that happened once every 3 years had also become a common practice. "Master, so you're one of us. Did you accept a mission or are you a freelance mage?" "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't dare to ask. If you're willing to tell me, please tell me." The three of them looked at this little black book and immediately revealed expressions of delight. If this was 10 years ago, it would already be underestimating for a legend-rank undead mage to be called a master. But because there were more and more fake masters and fake legends, the title of master was becoming less and less used. Quite a few of the official undead mages in the Northlands Definder had inextricable connections with the government. And this little book had the emblem of the Donglan royal mage family, which meant that this master had obtained the royal family's trust. Naturally, he could be trusted. And the emblem that represented his job's reputation was a rarely seen double crown. I personally have some connections with the Royal Mage Association. Since I've met with such a situation, I naturally can't stay out of it. But, being a gentleman before being a villain is the best way to cooperate. This time, if it involves the ruins of the Haletum generation, I want half of the profit. If there's any new technology, I can have priority in selling it to the Northlands government, but I can't miss out on my share of the profit. I didn't lie at all, and the documents in my hands were real. Of course, how I got them was self-explanatory. As for the 2 crowns of credibility, cough cough, do you know that there's a service called brushing crowns? For mages, the ancient knowledge and secrets that might exist in ancient ruins was an irresistible temptation. And if there were any traces left behind by the Haletum generation, it was even more likely that there would be new technologies and strategic weapons that would change the map of a country. There were many such examples in the history of the Holy War. Although in legends, there would occasionally be some minor character who unearthed some mystical technique or god equipment from ancient ruins, and then walked down the path of slaying demons and gods, in reality, it was quite rare to find god equipment when exploring ruins. After all, the passage of time was as merciless as grave robbers. More often than not, ancient technology and magical information would be restored based on the records, murals, and traces left behind. Such things wouldn't be of much use to an individual, and would only be a source of calamity. but for organizations that were capable of digesting such technology and ancient magic, it would be a priceless treasure. From a certain standpoint, if it wasn't for Timlad's technological support from the Halettim generation, there wouldn't have been the magical engineering revolution that was getting stronger and stronger. When a living ancient person couldn't be found, the documents and information left behind by an ancient civilization would be the only substitute. The Halettim generation? It's actually the Halettim generation. We've struck gold this time. Mary instantly jumped up in excitement. Her two companions had confused expressions. They didn't know why their companion was so excited. As one of the 4 elemental swordcasters, it was only natural for them to come into contact with magical engineering technology. Since they were studying magical engineering technology, how could they not know about the Halettim generation? I'll immediately write a letter to the headquarters. I'm just afraid that I won't be able to make it in time. Relax, I have some friendly relations with Master Timlad. I've already written a letter to him using a small demon express. Since this is related to the Halettim generation, no matter how busy he is right now, he'll probably hurry over. The moment I said this, the 3 of them visibly relaxed. Timlad was an incredible major figure in their eyes. Since he was familiar with him, this also proved that the undead mage before them was trustworthy. Of course, after I left, they would definitely discuss my identity and goal. That was why I kept my identity as an undead mage that stayed here for half a year in order to explore the ruins. I would wait for them to find clues from others and figure out the truth. Also, the fact that I was quite popular in this town would increase their trust in me. But now, after I said goodbye to them and went to prepare for my own trip, the silly cat suddenly appeared out of nowhere. I thought that you'd continue to pretend to be a holy knight. Ha, don't be silly. I've already received information from our spies that the Northlanders will always investigate the holy knight that suddenly appears out of nowhere. Haha, it seems that they've seen through you as well. Is that really the only reason? The silly cat narrowed her eyes as if she could see through everything. It would seem that she had long since thought of the reason and intentionally came here to torment me. That's only the main reason. My armor and metal weapons being too heavy are only secondary reasons. Since I had already seen through my disguise, there was no need for me to hide it anymore. My current physical condition was far too terrible, and it would be impossible for me to pretend to be a holy knight. Thanks to my pitiful strength and constitution, my chain mail was nothing more than chains that chained me. My full body armor was nothing more than a metal cage, and my metal sword was nothing more than a golden cudgel. I couldn't even carry the standard equipment of a knight, so how could I possibly pretend to be a holy knight? After all, it was highly likely that I would have to engage in a high-intensity battle. On the other hand, using elemental magic also required a certain amount of constitution and dexterity. The accuracy of one's hand gestures would directly affect the success rate of casting a spell. If one's constitution was too weak, it would be impossible for them to use powerful spells. Just dealing with the magic backlash would be difficult. Now that I thought about it, the only spells that I could casually cast under the current conditions were undead magic that could control corpses and undead creatures. This was also why I didn't stop the Holy Light cannon fodder from leaving. For the conservative Holy Knight faction, the Northlands trio was nothing more than a potential ally in a battle of faith. Undead mages would be their mortal enemy who would kill them first and ask questions later. Actually, if the conditions were right, pretending to be a holy knight would be the best. After all, they had a good enough reputation that not only would they not arouse any suspicion, but they would also be able to travel as they pleased, recruit cannon fodder, obtain the trust of adventurers and residents, obtain cheap and free supplies from villages along the way, and if necessary, start a civil war with the villagers. These were all hidden advantages. Only the idiots of the conservative faction would waste such an obvious advantage. However, I didn't go with them by myself. Since Katerina originated from the ruins, perhaps she was the key to opening the door to the ruins. Katerina herself also desired to find the truth. And since her daughter went, her father, old Barton, would naturally go with her as well. And since old Barton left, old Barton's grandfather naturally wouldn't fall behind. The end result was that I now had 2 decent combat strength members. Of course, we had a separate agreement to allow Winlair to follow us. But that's still not enough. Later, I'll need old Barton to go find his old friend and hire some cannon fodder, mercenaries. That quasi-legend spearman? Can't you say that he'll lower our team's luck stat? How many times do I have to say that the spearman's luck stat is just a rumor? Besides, if the rumor is true, don't you think it's a good thing? Do I really need a lightning rod? For some reason, I recalled the unlucky number 1 beauty of Sulphur Mountain. Considering her astonishing luck stat, even if she was always searching for a way to save herself, the wild elf was probably still the number 1 beauty. That's why you're looking for him, isn't it? Indeed, just treat it as some fun. What should we do now? Since it's highly likely that we'll encounter a battle, and I'm an undead mage right now, I don't have the privilege of hiding in the back and watching. In that case, in order to be slightly useful, let's go do what undead mages are supposed to do. Where's the nearest tomb? You're so stupid. That dragon Lich has a lot of inventory in his house. Don't you know that if you rob him, the corpses of those commoners who just died are so weak? Good idea. Let's exchange it with the fashionable gown that you're about to receive. Didn't you see how that guy was drooling while reading a magazine? It's basically ruining your face. That's not my face. It's like a doll's face. It's so different from my adult face. How would it feel to put your face on a woman's body? Renee. For some reason, I recalled the existence of Renee and the other Roland faces. I somewhat sympathized with the angry Harloise in front of me. At the very least, Renee wasn't blind. Speaking of which, after so many years, she should be a grown woman by now. Under the effects of estrogen, she probably wouldn't have that face anymore. Yes. Let's go and blackmail the Dragon Lich to take revenge for you. Let's rob that old demon clean of his inventory and vent your anger. But just as I took a few steps, I was blocked in the hallway. The adventurers led by the dwarven shield-bearer blocked my path. Caro, since the fight isn't going to continue, you should return us our gambling money. Look carefully at the gambling contract. There should be a line here. If the duel is suddenly unable to continue due to an irresistible reason, it'll be considered a draw. But I remember that none of you bet on a draw. Hearing this, the old dwarf leader suddenly rolled his eyes and looked up at the ceiling, as if pretending that he didn't know anything. However, he had probably already seen that line of extremely small words. The adventurers behind him also rubbed their palms together. It was quite obvious that they were threatening me. I'd advise you to snap. With a snap of my fingers, a black mist of death spread out from my shadow, transforming into a restless shadow demon. The entire room was instantly enveloped in a black shadow, and even the temperature dropped several degrees. Right, I forgot to tell you that I'm an undead mage, a legend ranked 1. Do you need something from me? Power was the best calling card. This frightening magic power was a naked threat. You want me to return the money? Heh. We're fine. It's just that it's time for dinner. We'd like to invite you down for dinner. Yep, we, the Thunder Brothers, will pay for tonight's drinks. Who said that dwarves were slow-witted? Weren't they quite sensible? They happily said all this before turning around and leaving without another word. But when I looked at the dwarven brothers' sturdy bodies and excellent weapons and armor, I suddenly recalled something. Actually, I'm a very reasonable person. I have a small job here that's suitable for relatively outstanding adventurers. If you go, it's not impossible for me to return your gambling money. If you do a good job, there'll be an extra commission. Chapter 492. What? No undead? The dragon Lich unhesitatingly agreed to my conditions after seeing the trendy clothing in the fashion magazines. However, when I asked him about it, he actually didn't have any powerful undead in his possession. Hey, you're a Dracolic, right? One of the strongest undead creatures. You're telling me that there aren't any powerful undead creatures in your dragon nest? There was a side effect of transforming into a Lich. No matter what kind of life form it was, the magic that drove its physical body would always be the power of death. If the magic that the Lich originally cultivated clashed with the power of death, its power would be reduced. However, controlling the undead that were weaker than itself was like an instinct, and the Lich's cultivation of necromancy magic improved by leaps and bounds. Undead magic, which they had suddenly mastered, was something that they couldn't forget. After so many years, it would be impossible for them to have no understanding of undead magic. That was why most undead Liches would have a large number of undead creations in their laboratories. Even if they were hired thugs, they were servants, or even family members. Dracolics were even more ridiculous. They were artificial undead dragons, and the difficulty of transforming them into undead dragons was one of the highest out of all undead rituals. Just completing the transformation would require a large amount of undead knowledge, but this Dracolic was actually telling me that it didn't have much undead knowledge? Those filthy things are ugly and smelly. How can I keep them in my palace? Alright then, I had even forgotten that the dragon Lich before me was a mega weirdo. Since this dragon Lich was willing to choose such a physical body for the sake of its artistic beauty, it was only natural that it would be able to sweep away all filthy undead. Don't you have banshees? Bind the beautiful spirit of the elf? How could I do such an evil thing? The face that looked exactly like Harlow's stared at me in astonishment, as if I had said something extremely evil, and I was doing my best to suppress the urge to smash it with a brick. Evil? You're AF * King Lich. No matter if it's a legend or reality, you're the most classic final boss. Alright then, I pretty much understood Rain's strange way of thinking. He would directly kick out the ugly undead, but beautiful undead would require beautiful raw materials, which he couldn't bring himself to do. You've really opened my eyes. I turned around and wanted to leave, but that guy pulled my sleeve and looked at me pitifully, at the fashion magazine in my hand. I shook my head helplessly. Just give me whatever I can. If I have to travel with a bunch of skeletons that fall apart on their own, I'd be too embarrassed to call myself a legend-rank necromancer. After so many years, it can't be that you have nothing, right? Fine, if you really don't have anything, then exchange it with your valuable art. These clothes are super expensive, and I need my connections to get a seasonal limited edition. I can't just give it to you for free. Art is out of the question. Beauty is priceless. Let me think. I remember that I should still have some of the past creations to look at. Lionel pondered for a while. Suddenly, he revealed a bright smile. He seemed to have thought of something. Yeah, let's exchange. I just remembered that I do have some beautiful undead creations. You'll definitely like them. Looking at the beautiful woman's bright smile, I suddenly felt that something was wrong. It seemed that I had done something wrong again. The next day, the sky had just brightened when the Rhino Tavern closed its doors. The entrance was already packed with people. It looked like it was time to set off. However, I still stayed in my room and didn't want to get out of bed. Last night, I had to clear out those undead creatures until very late. Another weakness of my weak constitution was that I had to maintain sufficient sleep every day. Let's go and sleep in the carriage. I didn't expect him to have a ghost carriage, and it was specially modified. It seems that I didn't lose out this time. The silly cat was crawling on my head as if she was thinking for my sake. However, I could feel her undisguised evil intentions. 1 ghost carriage, 6 gargoyles, 1 high-level zombie, and 2 web demons. This was the entire content of this exchange. They were all upgraded versions of strengthened undead. Judging from the value of this exchange, not only did I not lose out, I even earned quite a bit. However, let me sleep here. At the very least, we can wait for them to leave first. That's impossible. Everyone's waiting for you. Barton and Catalina were both my connections. The Northlands trio and I had reached an agreement and a basic level of trust. The scattered local mercenaries were either hired by me or found by old Barton. Even the dragon Lich was a secret agreement that I had made. From a certain standpoint, even if I wasn't the leader of this adventuring group, I could be considered the core of every member. Sigh, forget it. It's the undead mage Carlo who's going to lose face, not Roland. I got up from my bed in displeasure. Even an ugly daughter-in-law still needed her parent. Don't make it sound like you're losing out. What a beautiful carriage. I would have loved it back in the day. You said it was back in the day, didn't you? This carriage. The moment we walked out of the bar, a white carriage parked outside attracted everyone's attention. This carriage was made entirely out of white jade. There were exquisite decorative wings at the back of the carriage, and the design of the wings was the traditional ivy of the elves. 2 snow-white unicorns were pulling the carriage. Wherever the hooves stepped on, there were traces of green grass and wildflowers. The abundant power of nature made it seem like this was the carriage of the son of nature. The 2 unicorns neighed in delight upon seeing their new master arrive. It seemed that they couldn't wait to begin their journey. They had been idling in the warehouse for far too long. Now that they had a chance to go for a ride, their hooves danced in the air, and the silver bells on their horns kept ringing. You're telling me that this is a ghost carriage created by an undead mage? Where's the ghost horse's fatal breath of despair? Where's that black lightning-like phantom body? Where's the bone carriage's original skeleton decorations? And where did that headless carriage driver go? He should have left behind shadows instead of grass. Why did my ghost carriage, which is filled with the art of death and the beauty of bones, become like this? Please forgive me for being direct, but I don't think that it's the beauty of darkness at all. Bones and incomplete bodies only make it seem shabby. In my memories, the first undead mages were all slaves who didn't even have clothes to cover their bodies. My apologies, I didn't mean to suspect that you were poor. As the person who had modified this carriage, Winlair was naturally quite satisfied with the elven style that he had imagined. She was repeatedly studying the ivy carvings that he had left behind, as if he was engraving them into his memory. From his tone, it was obvious that he regretted selling this carriage to me. Winlair's choice of words was also quite typical of elves. He would embellish his words with disdain and dissatisfaction. What did he mean by, "I didn't mean to suspect that you were poor"? What he meant was that all undead mages are poor. You're an undead mage, so there's no need to doubt me. You're definitely poor. Apologize. Apologize to all undead mages. The moment that I walked out the door, I discovered that everyone else was looking at me in a rather strange manner. Their common fear and disgust towards undead mages had greatly decreased. Instead, they were astonished, as if they were looking at an alien. Damn it, I felt that the little bit of dignity that I had just built up had been completely destroyed. I regretted this trade even more. Damn it, only a dragon lich could come up with all these ridiculous undead. It just so happens that I'm the only one who can take the blame. Since I was an undead mage, these strange undead were naturally my creations. And this strange ghost carriage was the most acceptable out of all the undead. Next to me were the gargoyles. They were the core combat strength of the undead I had traded for. There were a total of 6 gargoyles. These half-elemental, half-undead construction creatures would often disguise themselves as gargoyles. They would be useful in ambushing enemies in battle. Since most of their physical bodies were sturdy stone statues, their resistance to attacks was quite good. Their ability to fly, sharp claws, and heavy weight gave them the reputation of being the vanguard of the flying undead. As half-undead construction creatures, gargoyles had many differences in materials, design, enchantment, craftsmanship, and so on. However, even the weakest gargoyle was a mid-level undead creature. After all, only a silver-ranked undead mage would be able to give life to these gargoyles. It was only natural for them to add some personal style to their gargoyles. Gargoyles' basic blueprints were quite simple, which meant that they were easy to modify and modify. Their power levels and attack methods would also be vastly different. The weakest gargoyle would be a flying statue, and it would even break apart when flying. As long as one was willing to spend money, it would be possible to fight a dragon's gargoyle by yourself. For example, you could use a titan's heart as your power source, enchanted adamantine as your armor, and 2 of the newest magical engines in your head. Fine then, I was talking about the Northland's military conglomerate's mecha, the Demon Warrior series. Actually, I could tell at a glance that they were all created from gargoyle blueprint. As for the gargoyles that I had just traded for, it was likely that the dragon Lich had paid an enormous price in order to create them. They were all coated with a mithril anti-rust coating and enchanted sapphire lenses. The cost of these materials was definitely not low. If I converted them into gold coins, I would have made a huge profit, but why didn't you give them clothes? Fine, I was an idiot. They're gargoyles, so of course they don't need to wear clothes. Heh, fashion is truly amazing. You actually managed to make otakus sell their wives' figurines. Cough, it was likely that some people had already guessed the Dragon Lich's gargoyle appearance. Yep, there were only 2 types. A naked male elf and a naked female elf, and they were all exactly the same size. Judging from their realistic expressions and physical characteristics, they were basically no different from living elves. The female elf had a bow and arrow on her back, making her a long-range model. The male elf didn't even have underwear, but he held a pair of scimitars. I'm not going to comment on how they don't have any basic equipment such as sharp claws and fangs. You enchanted all the gargoyles' parts so that all the joints can move, so what's the point of that? Are you going to make figurines or weapons? If you're so free, why don't you just give them some offensive magical weapons? My biggest doubt right now wasn't how Winlayer had come up with such a creative idea, but rather how he had gathered the materials back in the day. Or, perhaps I should say, how he had stripped all the elves naked before they became the elves' public enemy number 1. The elves' beauty was indescribable. The males were handsome, and the females were beautiful. The Dragon Lich's chosen models were no ordinary ones, either. They were valiant and beautiful, and that guy was a wood elf, moon elf, silver elf, and dark elf. He didn't even spare a single one of them. He was simply an elf's harem, and would indeed be quite pleasing to the eyes at home, but I really didn't make this. What do you all mean by looking at me like that? I never lie. And now, with 5 naked females, long-range attackers, and 1 naked male, melee attackers, flying around me, his problem became my problem. Everyone was looking at me with looks of disdain, as if they were saying, he really is a pervert, or, why did he make such things? Why were there 5 naked females and 1 naked male? Actually, the Dragon Lich had quite a few melee combat types in its inventory, and I also needed some melee combat cannon fodder. But after considering it over and over again, I unhesitatingly chose to be a pervert or a gay. At this moment, the statue of the naked man fell behind me. As the only gargoyle that could fight in close combat, his calculation core required him to take on the responsibility of guarding me. However, I felt that he was too close to me, especially certain parts of his body. He was almost touching me, so he's a two-way street. I was wondering why Caro hasn't pushed Catalina yet, so big. I never expected Caro to like this type. These words rang in my ears, and the next instant, I covered my face as tears of wronged blood flowed from my eyes. As expected, I shouldn't have considered any melee combat pairings. My reputation had been completely ruined. At this moment, I would rather become a super pervert in the eyes of the world. Let's go. I suddenly rushed onto the carriage. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to stop myself from going berserk if I heard any more of such words. The only thing that comforted me was that there was an even more wondrous creation in the carriage. Things weren't at their worst yet. Our first stop is to leave the city. No, to Anton Town's tailor shop. That's right, you heard correctly. Let's first buy some clothes for these indecent gargoyles. A mysterious sadness welled up in my heart. I was afraid that I would be recorded in history as the first undead mage to buy clothes for gargoyles. Chapter 493. Compared to ordinary carriages, these ghost carriages had obvious advantages. They didn't need to replenish their food or water, nor did they need to be picky about flat roads. As long as they had enough mana, they could even temporarily float in the air and surpass the limitations of space and terrain. The especially strengthened ghost carriages even had the ability to move in a fixed direction. Winlair was obviously someone who knew how to enjoy life. His reinforced living space was far more spacious and comfortable than it seemed on the outside. No matter how steep the mountain path was, there wasn't even a single bump on the inside of the carriage. The carriage was divided into 3 compartments with all the same equipment. However, only Catalina, Harlois, Winlair, and a few other female companions were currently sitting in one of the compartments. This wasn't because I had chosen this specifically. It was just a common practice for adventurers on long-distance journeys. In such a long-distance journey, in order to maintain sufficient stamina and combat strength, only these weak women would have the privilege of riding on any form of transportation in order to maintain sufficient stamina and combat strength. Fine then, I should admit that these weak women were the strongest fighters out of all of us. But, compared to a crude man, it would still be better to have beautiful women by my side. Winlair was our greatest support on this trip, and Harlois hadn't changed her name. As my magical pet, she still had legend-rank abilities. Her actual combat strength was more than enough to defeat a low-level legend. She would even be able to fight against a saint rank. As for Catalina, she was actually the greatest reward of this trip. An artificial intelligence with such a rich and complete emotional system. She's no different from a normal person. The Halettum generation was truly terrifying back in the day. There was a magic book on the table, but I was thinking about something. On the other side, under my control, the gargoyles were patrolling back and forth. Within a 3-kilometer radius, not even a field mouse would be able to escape from their specially strengthened sapphire eyes. The 4 gargoyles formed a surveillance net, and they were doing their job as watchers extremely well, so there was no need to worry at all. You got what you paid for. The upper limit of a construction creature's abilities was only related to the creator's skills and the quality of the materials used. Although many precious materials were used in ways that were impossible to evaluate, since they had the money to paint the gargoyles with mithril and move their joints, they would have invested quite a bit in basic abilities as well. Even the most useless direct combat ability would be no problem for a gargoyle to solo a silver-ranked individual. Caro, perhaps my direct gaze was too rude, but Catalina, who was sitting in front of me, lowered her head with a bright red face. Oh, sorry. I was thinking about something. As an expert on the soul, undead, living, and elemental souls were no secrets to me. Back when I first met Catalina, I had been astonished by the artificial soul in her artificial body. Low-level artificial souls weren't that difficult to deal with. The gargoyles all had simple judgment abilities. Tower spirits, metal golems, and other such existences also had their own intelligence. Just looking at their calculation abilities, they were probably above Catalina's. Still, her appearance was still a rather special sign. An ordinary artificial soul is no different from Catalina? There's probably no difference in the short term, but the foundational difference is quite obvious. Low-level artificial creatures already have their abilities and usages determined from the moment they were created. Meanwhile, Catalina has the ability to learn, have a sense of self, and have emotions. Her growth rate is no different from a human's. Not to mention that her body is made of metal, so she has limitless potential. If this was an ordinary physical world, pure logical calculations wouldn't be that different from artificial souls. However, H's will could transform into power. Only a soul with emotions, a sense of self, and a sense of self would be able to become a truly powerful individual. No matter how powerful one's inflexible logic was, it would only be a tool. Only a soul with emotions, anger, sorrow, and joy would be an independent person. The strength of a soul and how it would develop would directly affect a person's future potential. I could sense that if an ordinary person's soul was an unpolished ore, then Catalina's soul would be like a sun surrounded by ore. Even if there was a layer of obstruction on the outside, the brilliance of the core would be impossible to cover up. Her soul's strength is just like the reincarnation of a legendary hero or a god's child. If even such existences can be mass-produced, then it's only natural that the Haletum generation was wiped out by the gods back in the day. I tried having Catalina interact with martial arts and magic, but I didn't see any specialties in her. However, she definitely had something special about her. After all, it was impossible for the Haletum generation to expend so many resources to create such a top-level artificial soul, only to use her as a common job like a bar waitress. I was unable to recreate the process of creating artificial souls, but I understood what high quality meant. In order to create such a naturally powerful soul, a sufficient price would have to be paid. Just a slight estimate told me that the price far surpassed the value of a floating city. There was nothing more attractive than an unknown yet powerful artificial soul to soul experts. If it wasn't for the fact that Catalina was a mechanical life form and not an ordinary life form, and that I wasn't skilled in engineering, I wouldn't have been confident in being able to successfully dismantle and recreate her soul. It was likely that Catalina would have already been reduced to spare parts. And if it wasn't for the fact that Catalina attracted so much of my attention, I probably wouldn't have stayed here, nor would I have discovered Dragon Knight General Barton. I wasn't gay, so why would I memorize a man's name for no reason? I only discovered Catalina's family as a bonus. Just a single creation already has such profound secrets. There must be astonishing secrets in those ruins. I absolutely can't lose them. If it wasn't for the fact that researching Catalina and training up little Barton had taken up so much of my energy, I would have gone to those ruins long ago to dig up treasures. Now that it was highly likely that someone else would beat me to it, I wanted to obtain all the secrets and benefits from those ruins. That was my main goal for coming here. And in order to completely squeeze out all the value from those ruins, I didn't even mind exposing myself and invited the great engineer Tim Ladd. What? An undead portal? Well, since I met them, I might as well take care of them. If I couldn't take care of them, then so be it. There were so many battlefields in this world, so what could I possibly do about it? Aren't you afraid of going overboard and having an HE version of a war between humans and machines? Perhaps the woman before you is the future Skynet, and the ancient ruins you're really going to excavate might actually be a dormant killing machine factory. The Terminator? Don't try to scare me. Theoretically speaking, I don't believe that creating a completely humanoid soul like Catalina is a technology that can be mass-produced. And even if it can be mass-produced, and even if dangerous artificial souls are created, this isn't Earth. What's there to be afraid of? That's right, this wasn't a modern city filled with electrical and electronic devices. Not only was most of this world still in the Middle Ages, even magical engineering was only similar to purely manual machines. There was no room for artificial souls to interfere. Even if I wanted to have a war between Skynet and magic, there wouldn't be a place for Skynet to grow strong. What? My technology would mature after several thousand years? A war between humans and machines would occur at that time? At that time, who knows where my ashes would go? What does that have to do with me? Caro, you have a strange expression on your face. Are you feeling unwell? There were far too many thoughts going through her mind. Caro's constant changing expression made Catalina feel uneasy. She carefully asked Caro this question. "He's thinking about how to strip off your clothes." Harlois's words were filled with malice. However, this caused Catalina to suddenly take half a step back and lean against her chair. Caro's expression was one of desire to skin her alive. She had long since been suspicious of Caro. Far too many things had happened in the past few days, to the point where she, a barmaid who hadn't received much education, was unable to think straight. Caro's originally trustworthy good friend suddenly became a high and mighty mage. Caro was now looking at her as if he could see through her very soul, which made her feel uneasy. No matter how much she thought about it, there had to be some other reason for a venerated mage to pretend to be a gambling addict in a bar for half a year. He even got along well with a barmaid of lowly birth. And now, this golden-haired little girl seemed to give a reasonable answer. "You, Caro, tell me that you're not such a person. Why aren't you saying anything? We're good friends. I treat you as a brother, as an older brother. Could it be that you really just want to bed me?" The barmaid who hadn't gone to school had interacted with uncouth adventurers since she was young. Her words were so direct and bold. For a moment, forget about me, even Harlois, who was filled with malice just a moment ago, was stunned. "Big sister, he's a bastard. He's an irresponsible playboy. He's already made countless girls cry. Even I'm one of his victims. And what he wants to do the most right now is to strip off everything from you. Look at how he's grinding his teeth. He's going to beat me up again. Save me, big sister." The darned cat pounced into Catalina's embrace. Tears were already flowing out from the corners of her eyes. She seemed to have suffered greatly. "You think you can ask him? He placed a curse on himself. He can't lie, but he's very good at using flowery words to get away with it. You can ask him if what I said just now was true. Does he want to strip you? Did he make many good girls cry?" Yes, no? Flowery words. There's no doubt that we don't need any other answers. F***ck. Harlois. I wanted to go berserk, but I didn't know how it felt to be tied down by the truth and lies that I was so skilled at. However, I didn't know how to start. And, in other people's eyes, my anger was probably due to the humiliation of having a bad habit exposed. In Katerina's eyes, my silence was a form of tacit agreement. This was a tremendous blow to her, as if she had been struck by lightning. Her face instantly paled as she stumbled down the carriage and hid behind her adopted father's back. "Silly cat! Ha, Eliza, Amelia, you actually have the mood to get involved in a new relationship? I'm the one who ruined your plans. Don't thank me." Just as I was about to take revenge, those two familiar names caused me to instantly cool down. At the same time, under the watchful eyes of the gargoyles, I received some trouble that I had no choice but to deal with. Chapter 494. Every era has its own imprint, which is an objective fact that is not determined by personal opinions. In the feudal era of the Middle Ages, advocating bourgeois revolution was tantamount to seeking death. If you advocated equality for all in socialism, you would be seeking death. In H.E., the core reason why the feudal system of feudal enfeoffment and city-states was so deeply rooted was because of the cruel natural environment. The weak needed to rely on the strong to survive. The wild was full of ferocious magical beasts, and they were always in a cruel natural cycle. If they lived in the wild, it was equivalent to putting themselves into the food chain, and in most cases, ordinary humans could only become food. A pack of ordinary wild wolves would be capable of devouring a family of 6. Even a pack of wild wolves wouldn't be able to defeat a single winter wolf magical beast. A pack of winter wolves was nothing more than the frost giant's livestock. Whenever winter arrived, the white dragons would generally enjoy the frost giant's abundant food and warm caves. They would also use the bodies of the white dragons frozen in ice as backup rations. Of course, the reality of society would change. Sometimes it would change for the better, and sometimes it would change for the worse. Although humans had their limits, some people were capable of changing the world bit by bit. Did this sound contradictory? In a certain world, the discoveries and inventions of Darwin, Bruno, and other scientists were gradually announcing the end of the ignorant era. The birth of magical engineering technology, the popularization of elemental users, and the power of law were also gradually reducing the gap between the strong and the weak. The collapse of the holy light divine authority was also, from a different standpoint, announcing the end of the power of natural talents. Alright, some people could probably tell that all these changes were related to a certain someone. He had indeed played a big game of chess. Some things can only be done, not said. When the time comes, what should come will come. Idiots who shout, "It's coming," all the crowns are about to fall to the mortal realm, before the time comes will only be crushed by the wheels of history. All this time, a certain someone had only done things without saying anything. He knew that some things could only be done naturally. He had never intended to shout slogans and become the mortal enemy of the various kings. After all, in this feudal era, that would be the equivalent of cutting himself off from the world. A certain someone only hoped that he would sow some seed. After he died, the constantly increasing productivity and social trends would change the world for the better. But, at least for now, there was still nothing to write home about in this world. There would still be plenty of troubles. Robbers? How could there be bandits in this season? This is an official road. Perhaps the ones who were the most shocked by this news were the trio from the northern lands. Perhaps it's better to put it in another way. Rebels, Marquis Stanley's rebels. I just heard the news a few days ago that they're fighting again. Old Barton, who used to be a mercenary, was now the owner of a bar. How could he not know about this? Betrayal at this time? This was the Holy War. A battle for justice that involves the entire race. Mary, who had just arrived in the Sala Dukedom, was very surprised. But from what she said, the things she knew were probably just the written information. It said that the Marquis is a devil worshipper. His military flag has the symbol of an evil snakehead devouring skulls. The elders of the Holy Church have long since declared him to be a heretic, but they don't have the spare energy to deal with an enemy so far away. The gargoyle's vision far surpassed that of an ordinary scout. After gathering the information, they were able to obtain some new information that made them feel helpless. After sharing the information with a few of the leaders, arguments and discussions continued in the carriage. Is it a devil that interfered this time? It's impossible that it's our friendly army this time. This kind of thing had happened quite a lot in the past few years. Humans were not a very strong species, especially those bloated nobles who held high positions just because of their bloodline. They had many desires, such as immortality, greater power, and a higher status. The devil's temptation and the devil's whisper were just metaphors in the past, but now they were real threats. Dimensional invaders needed strongholds, sacrifices, and a sufficient number of souls. This was especially true after the Chaos Abyss Lord in the lower planes had disappeared. Many major demon lords fell in love with this once-in-a-lifetime carnival. Demon worshippers and dark cultists were at least 100 times more active than 10 years ago, and the youthfulness and power obtained through sacrifices caused even more people to walk down this seemingly shortcut of no return. The strongest noble of the Sala Dukedom, Marquis Stanley, had recently raised the flag of rebellion. No matter if there really was a devil behind this, or if it was just to scare his cowardly subordinates into following him, Marquis Stanley had drawn a devil's symbol on his military flag. It was obvious that he no longer viewed himself as an ordinary human or a subordinate of Sala Dukedom. Naturally, the Sala Dukedom sent out an army led by the Archduke's eldest son to fight against Marquis Stanley. The dukedom summoned several major nobles to fight against Marquis Stanley. This seemed to have happened last winter. Both sides had already fought more than 10 small-scale battles of various sizes, with no clear victor. This originally didn't have much to do with us. After all, the main battlefields were all major demon lords' territories, which were quite far away from us. And as long as there was a war, there would definitely be defeated armies and deserters. These people were even more dangerous than ordinary bandits. If these defeated generals and deserters returned to their hometowns, they would likely be hanged to death. If they were deserters from the rebel army, they would even have a few more wanted posters on them. They wouldn't even dare to go to ordinary cities. A group of semi-professional warriors like them also needed to eat. In the face of the pressure of survival, they basically had no bottom line as they risked their lives to begin with. The best way to support themselves was probably to become bandits and rob passing merchant caravans. In normal situations, only after the Civil War had ended would the victors have the strength to begin hunting down deserters. However, the Civil War had already been going on for more than half a year without any result. It was far from over. The scale of the war wasn't large. There were less than 100,000 people participating. In front of me, who was used to epic battles, this could only be considered a small skirmish. But even such a small skirmish was enough to cause hundreds or even thousands of deserters. And a bandit group consisting of only a few dozen deserters was already the tragedy of a small village or a small merchant group. Perhaps this was the tragedy of being born in this generation, a tragedy that belonged to mortals. They have several dozen ordinary people with them. They're probably captives, and many of them are injured. Are there any nearby villages? There's a village called Lanty on the map. It only has about 100 households, so several dozen professional soldiers should definitely be able to take it down. What about the nearby domain lord? He didn't send out troops to suppress the bandits? I think he's just a second-generation knight who donated money to get his position. He just got here not long ago, and he only has a few dozen guards under him. He might not be able to react in time, and even if he did react, he might not be able to defeat them. It seems that there are locals among them. As a professional mercenary who had been in the area for almost 30 years, the quasi-legend Winston had some understanding of the surrounding domain lords. After all, these were the most common employers for powerful mercenaries like him. Protecting the safety of one's own territory was the duty of every domain lord. If other domain lords were to do this for them, it would be the equivalent of declaring war. And if they weren't strong enough and needed to take action, hiring some trustworthy mercenaries was only natural. And if it wasn't for the fact that he had already received this mission, the righteous Winston would definitely have recommended himself to the Knight Domain Lord, accepted the mission, and led his brothers to eliminate these deserters who were endangering the village. I nodded. Winston's judgment was reasonable, and these deserters weren't stupid. They picked on the weakest, and the Domain Lord would pick on the weakest. It was likely that there was a local guide among them. I had the gargoyle look into the distance. In the direction of Lanty village, I could faintly see the light of fire and black smoke. It seemed that these bandits had just attacked the village, and were still on their way home. And now, they were lying in ambush at the top of a mountain on the official road that we had to pass through. It was likely that they had seen our carriage from a high place, and wanted to catch up with us. The luxurious carriage and the white horses pulling the carriage were practically the symbol of a major noble. Those warriors with messy footsteps and uneven equipment were obviously mercenaries. Added together, they were a piece of top-notch fatty meat. I'll go and quickly deal with them so we can hurry on our way. I still need some skeleton soldiers and zombies. As former professional soldiers, they shouldn't disappoint me.